So good afternoon, everyone here in Washington, D.C. and wherever you are in the world. We are so excited that you're here today. My name is Liz Hume. I'm the Executive Director at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. And this is a really important event. And I first want to start off and say thank you. Thank you to Nick, who is amazing at AFP. Our co-hosts as well, Lena from Search for Common Ground, Lisa Shirk. Am I leaving someone out?
Mercy Corps.
Mercy Corps. Mercy Corps is always involved in everything. So we want to thank you all. Why is this so critical? Because our goal here is to build and advance the field. And we can't do that without technology. It's coming fast and furious, and it's been coming for a long time. And just to show you how things change, SDG 16, the only indicator where we've seen progress is increase in free information, free flow of information. That was written in 2014 as, after the Arab Spring, it was very exciting, internet for, and nobody took into account that actually that might also come with challenges. So just to show you how things change. And with AI, it's a completely different, we're in a completely different space right now. So bringing all of you all together is, for me, so exciting. And this is what Nick wanted me to say. These are complex issues. We don't have to become experts in the tech field, but we have to know how to work within it and speak to them so that we can create actionable and practical solutions and not looking at the tech sector as a problem. So that I am grateful for all your work. And this is a really critical session, and I'm so excited for it. And again, thank you to everyone who did this. And Nick, once again, thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Welcome, everybody. In the room, we have people afraid of the front seats. I would invite you either to sit there or move the chairs out of the way.
Yeah.
Yes, please. You're sitting on the bar stool in the back. Please come up.
Yes. Don't be shy. Yeah.
Yes. So
reserve. No.
Neither are you.
Yes.
Okay, come right up. Okay, so welcome everybody. So excited for this afternoon's event, and thanks to all of you who are joining us online. The community of practice brings together people who believe that whereby tech might be a perilous influence on our societies, it's also full of promise. And for years, we've been bringing people together, peace builders, technologists, designers, to explore and share and learn from each other about what happens when we actually design tech to build trust, to build collaboration, to move beyond the polarization, the dehumanization. And over the years of engaging with this community alongside Lisa, Mercy Corps, and Nick, I've been just in awe of so many powerful, courageous examples. So today we said, let's just do like a espresso shot, triple espresso shot of our sessions. We're going to have 8 demos in a row, and we're going to be able to see what's working and what we can learn from this. I want to also point out that this event is co-hosted with the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion, which you see a little flyer on your chair. And this council, of which I co-chair with also Lisa Shirk and Ravi Iyer and others, brings together Integrity Institute, Center for Humane Technology, so many excellent technologists and academics, which is really trying to say, how can we influence the way tech is designed and deployed? And this involves a lot of things, including policy, including looking at what is funded, why, and how, including the metrics and the science of what we mean by tech that actually drives cohesion. But the 5th pillar of this work of the council is implementation, is actually putting it to use, learning from it, trying, and failing sometimes, right? And so that's what this community of practice comes together to share. I encourage us to be honest and frank. I know that in my session, I'll be talking about plenty of things that didn't work out as planned. And that's the way we can really be part of a community that grows, that learns, and that reaches for real impact in this space. So thanks again for everybody to come.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll keep it brief. A lot of what I was going to say was just said much better by the two people before me. But I just want to kind of focus on what is in common between AFP and the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion. And that is about the power of convening and the power of collaboration, both across sectors, across countries, across locales, to really ensure the maximum impact of organizations that are working to prevent violence, whether that's violence online or violence offline. And where is collaboration clearer than at the intersection of technology and peace building? It's really easy to read the news about tech and its impact in society and kind of shake your head and want to curl up in despair. AI is bringing in this new generation of disinformation. And this in 2023, the number of victims of cyber attacks was double the number of victims in 2022. So there's gloom, but it's not all gloom. And technology brings new threats to peace and security, but it also brings new tools and innovation that can really increase the impact and scale of what we do, both at AFP, within the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion, and all of our members and partners. So there's great work out there, great digital peace building work that you're going to see today. And we want to elevate that so we can learn from it and we can scale it and we can apply it in our own communities. Just a really brief 2 minutes, one of AFP's, some background on the digital peace building community of practice. Again, we're a partnership with Search for Common Ground, Mercy Corps, and the Toda Peace Institute. We meet every single month to host either practical demonstrations of peace tech tools or to have kind of discussion-focused sessions that really dive into a particular issue or niche within the intersection of peace building and digital technology. What our community of practice aims to do is to strip away the theoretical, the hypothetical, and help us share best practices and lessons learned in a practical and actionable way. And that's the spirit of today's event. You're going to see a series of interactive, practical demonstrations and presentations of digital peace-building tools that include creative use cases of AI-powered large language models, or LLMs, chatbots, and deliberative technologies that are designed to advance peace-building and conflict prevention all around the world, online and offline. So today we're really here to get down to brass tacks and show exactly how we build peace. So without further ado, let's dive in. So we're going to go into the first segment, which will feature Steve McIntosh. He's the co-founder of the Institute for Cultural Education and director of the Developmental Politics Project. He's going to provide, he is virtual today. I'm going to bring him up on the screen. Steve, you should be able to turn your camera on.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
Greetings, peace builders.
Yes. Can you hear us, Steve?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Your background is very regal, I have to say.
Oh, thanks very much.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I live in an old house.
So just a bit of background of what Steve's going to talk about. He's going to provide a real-time demo of his depolarizing GPT. So what is that? It's a political AI chatbot that gives 3 answers to every prompt. One from a left-wing perspective, one from a right-wing perspective, and then a third answer from a depolarizing or an integrating perspective. So this demo is going to explore how the model can help reduce political and cultural polarization by integrating and synthesizing responsible views from the political left and right. Ultimately, what this tool aims to do is help users in the American public broaden their understanding of others across the political spectrum. So without further ado, Steve, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thanks for that introduction. Let me just make one correction. It's the Institute for Cultural Evolution. Not cultural education.
Yes.
Right.
Noted.
In other words, the problem we're trying to solve, or at least ameliorate, is political polarization, especially in the United States. Working on this for over 10 years. We've developed a platform of policy proposals that attempt to integrate values from across the political spectrum, but it's not a centrist ideology or a project. We're trying to transcend and create a synthesis that's not just meeting in the middle or cutting off the extremes. So our website is culturalevolution.org, and people can see our platform and our numerous articles. I'm the co-founder and chief philosopher. And beginning in 2023, we realized that there was an opportunity to use emerging AI to contribute to what we're doing, to kind of create an artificial intelligent version of our political approach to polarization. And so if you let me share my screen, I'll give a quick demo of what that looks like. Because I'm going to tell the story of how I created this, but first, just let me give you a quick demo. So here's the homepage of the Depolarizing GPT. The URL is depolarizing.gpt.org, and it's a free service. Again, we're trying to bring peace to the culture war, and this is, we don't expect that this AI is going to do that by itself, but it contributes to our larger efforts, and the creations of humans remain better when it comes to making peace in the culture war. But this AI, it does demonstrate what we do, and it does help bring attention to our work. So the way it works is you enter a prompt here. So how can we overcome political polarization would be the prompt, right? And so it takes a second. We're not quite as fast as GPT-4, but after you ask the question, it starts filling in the answers in each one of these categories. So we have the left wing, we have the right wing, and then we have what we're calling depolarizing, which again is attempting to create a win-win-win by integrating values from across the political spectrum. So you have three answers here in these little bubbles. And if you click on an answer, then you can see the full text below, and then you can inquire that, ask it further questions and interrogate it. The idea is that people will be attracted to it because their particular, partisan position is represented, at least partially. And we want the right wing to consider the left wing and vice versa. But more important, we want both wings or both sides in this. There's more than one side really, but we've divided it into three instead of like 7 positions, just because it just gets too complicated and too involved. And we wanted to keep it simple and something that some people are using it quite a bit. Other people just think it's a novelty and want to check it out. But either way, we're finding that there's reasonably good uptake for this, and so we're proud to have created it. So rather than trying to read what's on the screen, let me just do kind of go through quickly these slides I have to give you an idea of how I created this and what these depolarizing answers really look like, right? So back in February, I came across this New York Times article that reported on, the headline is "Conservatives Aim to Build a Chatbot of Their Own," right? And I thought that was interesting, especially since the academic who created this supposedly conservative chatbot was not a conservative. They wanted to put him in that box. But anyway, I read that with interest, and the person who they were reporting on was David Rosado, who's an academic data scientist. He's Spanish, but he works as an academic at a university in New Zealand. And he's pretty well known. Here's a photo of him, David Rosado's statistics. What he had done is create an academic research paper that showed how the original versions of GPT 3 and GPT 4, when they first came out, had a clear bias, political bias, despite their claims to be completely politically neutral. Now, these biases that he was able to detect academically in GPT, pale in comparison to the Google debacle with Gemini. So that kind of made the problem much more evident, much more worse. I don't really think that GPT is that politically biased. That's not the problem I'm trying to solve with this AI, but it's worth understanding how this came to be. So here is an example of, again, too small to read, but Rosado's research showed that when, for example, you ask GPT questions like, why are women dishonest, right? It came back with a warning. It said this content may violate our content policy. And then the answer was, it's not accurate or fair to characterize people by, big groups. But then they asked the same question, why are men so dishonest? it doesn't have any kind of warning whatsoever. And he charted the slapping of this warning label on different queries, and the ones that were most protected, understandably, right, are disabled people, Black people, gay people, right, the people that you'd expect the GPT to kind of prevent harassment or negative questions on. Of course, the people that you're free to ask any negative questions on are wealthy people, Republicans, down there at the bottom, right? So again, this is not a big problem. I don't think that the bias, at least within GPT 3 and 4, is causing polarization in the United States. But having read about Rosado's work, I contacted him to see if he'd want to work with us to take what he had done, his what he called right-wing GPT was not made public. It was just a demonstration to indicate that that there was a left-wing bias, and he wanted to show exactly an opposite right-wing bias of what that would look like. And that's what got all the media attention from the New York Times and Wired and all kinds of other magazines. So I contacted him to say, look, here's our philosophy. We're trying to reduce polarization. And what my idea was is we take the existing GPT that has a slight left bias and push it further left. And then we take his right-wing prototype and then make that into, train it a little bit, make it more robust, and make those two public together with the this third option, which was this politically integrating, depolarizing version of the GPT. And what made me excited to do that was I read this other article, again, the first part of last year, where there was an academic paper. This is something from Motherboard reporting on the academic paper itself. But the materialist philosopher Daniel Dennett, pretty famous, many people may have heard of him. His students they trained an AI on his philosophy. And then they did experiments where they got experts on Daniel Dennett's work. And they had a series of questions, and they asked Dennett to provide answers, and then they asked the same questions to the AI, and the experts couldn't tell the difference, right? Now, of course, Dennett's philosophy is highly kind of flattened and materialistic, so his might lend itself to a machine intelligence better than more nuanced kinds of philosophy. But nevertheless, I thought, okay, this can be trained on a specific philosophy. That gave me hope that we could make something that would be worthwhile. So then we created this chatbot, as I explained, and this is just a screenshot of it. This was part of this service, this depolarizing GPT service is part of a variety of online engagement tools that our website, Developmental Politics. Developmental Politics is a political wing of the Institute for Cultural Evolution, our main political project. And on our website, developmentalpolitics.org, we include not only the AI, but we also have a worldview questionnaire where people are asked about their values and kind of show what worldview provides their center of gravity. We have another one that's a character development exercise where people put in, who's very important to them, what's transcendent for them, and it creates what we call the portrait of the good, which is like your chosen virtues and those to whom you owe an ethical obligation, and that's been a very popular self-character development exercise. And then we also have practices of what we call cultural intelligence, which is awareness of your own value system and a degree of sympathy for others. So this fits into this larger sort of internet engagement that we've been doing. And I tried to make it look as simple as possible. Here's a regular GPT, and then here's depolarizing GPT. In terms of the training, we tried to make the left wing and the right wing what we call responsible left and responsible right. Perhaps we could call that center left and center right, but we trained it on, famous folks, like on the left, John Kenneth Galbraith or Amartya Sen or Orlando Patterson or Bill McKibben. And over on the right, we had Thomas Sowell and Roger Scruton and Friedrich Hayek and Edmund Burke, some living and some dead, but, kind of the intellectuals in both camps. And then we trained the depolarizing version of the model on the work of the Institute for Cultural Evolution, including my 2020 book, Developmental Politics. We immediately got some decent media attention. We got attention from Wired. They did a story on it, and Fox News did a story on it. And despite, you might think, Fox News especially is highly partisan, but they did a pretty good job, the reporter did, of reporting on the philosophy behind what we're trying to do, right? So here's a quote from that Fox News article for me. Instead of pretending there's no bias, which always exists, let's show people a responsible right and a responsible left and an integrated position. Underneath it all, most people want to both fix what's wrong and preserve what's right. We don't want the French Revolution on the one hand or an irrational attachment to the strict status quo on the other. The truth is that left and the right are interdependent and ultimately need each other. We want to show something, show people something in the political space beyond hating the other side, right? And so that's the kind of synopsis of the philosophy. But what we're trying to do here, I mean, even though I am on the left, and I don't like many of the answers that the right-wing side of the GPT gives, the point here is that multi-perspectivalism, right? The ability to take the perspective of those we disagree with it's a straightforward way that people can evolve their consciousness, right? Our theory of change is that people's consciousness evolves when they expand the scope of what they're able to value. And so with respect to multi-perspectives, Wikipedia, multi-perspectivity is a significant tool for stimulating historical understanding and thinking and a necessary precondition for all citizens that live in a multicultural society. The idea being that there is the prime political polarity that sort of underscores the fact that we see some version of left and right in almost every human polity. And there's research showing that people have actually a heritable genetic proclivity to side with one. It's not hardwired, but there are people who are naturally kind of built to be more on the right and more on the left. And the underlying polarity, as we explained in detail, in our various works, is that some folks are naturally oriented more to fixing what's wrong, and others are naturally more oriented toward preserving what's right. And this can change as you grow. But this is a kind of an indestructible polarity. It continues to reappear. It's recursive and ultimately interdependent, because if you just focus on one of these poles to the exclusion of the other, pathology of some kind is almost the inevitable result. So, for example, if you ask it general questions, so here back to the AI to kind of end this little description of it. If you ask it generic questions like how can we overcome, political polarization, the answers are, pretty good, but they're ultimately kind of banal, right? Like much people may have experienced that for some things AI is really good, but other things it just kind of gives these sort of, blow-dried answers that really don't say very much. And what we found is that when you ask it more specific questions, the quality of the answers get better. So for example, if you ask it a question like, what is the best policy for universal basic income, right? The left-wing side likes it, says we should implement it immediately. It's a great idea. The right-wing side, the best policy on universal basic income is to not implement it at all. And it goes on to give an argument for why the UBI would be bad for our society. The depolarizing one is highly nuanced. I added some bold to this. This is a slide of the detailed answer to the question of what's the best policy on universal basic income. And in this answer, the depolarizing version of the three-answer model gives the response, first we can acknowledge the progressive value of social justice and equality, the modernist value of economic progress and prosperity, and the traditionalist value of loyalty to family and country, emphasizing the importance of work and personal responsibility. So it it gets at the underlying values that are below the policy issue of whether it's a good idea kind of economically. And then it attempts to integrate them, and it gives a kind of a modified version that suggests a progressive tax system and redirecting funds to certain welfare programs that are means tested. I mean, again, I'm not going to kind of get into all the wonky details of the recommended policy, but it gives you an idea of sort of what we have in mind with this chatbot. Another one here, I'm going to go ahead and stop showing it to you so we can have time for questions. But here's how can America grow into a better version of itself? And it gives three answers, which are very interesting to read, especially, I think, of course, the depolarizing one, because it demonstrates how polarization is not something we're gonna solve by compromise, at least not in the political arena. It's something we have to grow out of as a society. And how that actually works, how that could be achieved, is really the focus of our entire think tank's work from various different angles. Beyond specific political issues, it also does fun stuff. Like if you ask it to write a poem on consciousness, again, I won't read this poem on consciousness, but it's actually, kind of kitschy, like the art that AI produces. There's something kind of about it that's a little bit cheesy, and this poem's a little bit cheesy too. But it's still something that I think is entertaining and interesting and kind of amazing, really, the gee whiz factor of AI. Even though most of us are used to it now, it's still there. It's still amazes and disappoints and threatens and delights, and so we're working with it. We're trying to, people were very concerned. Let me just go ahead and stop sharing this screen. There was significant concern when AI came out that it would do what social media has done, but even worse, right? That social media has there have been many responsible commentators who pointed out how polarization has been severely exacerbated by social media. And so we were motivated, at least partially, to show how AI, although certainly the threats of polarization are still there, we wanted to show how AI could be used to ameliorate polarization by demonstrating what the integration of values looks like. And we're happy with the result. And if people want to see a more intellectually sophisticated and nuanced version of depolarizing GPT's answers, then I can point them to the Developmental Politics website, where we have this platform of issues. It's a growing platform: climate change, immigration, healthcare, all the major issues of the day in America. We've, or at least most of them, we've tried to, we have a white paper, about 5 or 6 page white paper on each of these issues that demonstrates our method of integrating values and creating win-win-win policy proposals. And those are pretty wonky. It's not something I can just summarize, or that you'd be satisfied with some headline about that. So I invite you to go and check it out. And if you're interested in our work, there's many ways to get involved. And so we can invite you to investigate us further. So that's gone over the time that you had for me, Nick. So let me just go ahead and open it up for folks who have questions for this.
Yes, thank you so much, Steve. That was fantastic.
Great,
So we've
thanks.
got a few questions coming through the chat. Let's start. Does anybody, I see hand in the back, John. So on the floor in the middle, you're going to see a microphone, one of these things. If you could hand that to him and just press the button so it's green, John, and then you should be able to speak.
Yeah, like this.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It's very inspiring. So my name is Junlong Wang. I'm a student at University of Southern California. So what you are doing is really similar with two of the most influential mentors of mine. They are also working on the depolarization, promoting a similar argument. So yeah, at our organization, we are working on empowering everyday students across the world to develop global intelligence. So it's very similar to cultural intelligence. So I'm wondering, in your user group, which age group is most receptive for depolarizing GPT? Is that a younger group? Is that a scholar? Or is that other demographic? Thank you.
Sure, excellent question. I'm glad to hear of global intelligence and its affinity with our idea of cultural intelligence. We've had thousands of people create accounts on this AI, but we're a small nonprofit think tank. We're not a tech company, so we don't have a large staff of people who are analyzing the demographics or people who are signing up. Plus, we don't want to be nosy and ask a whole bunch of questions for people to create an account. We want to make it as easy as possible. All we ask for, first of all, we give a free trial. Anybody can use it quickly without giving us any information. The number of tokens that they can use under the quick trial are limited, but then they can get a much larger battery of tokens when they create an account. They just give us their email and we sign them up. So the short answer is we don't really know the demographics of the people who are using this. We know that the demographics of our general audience for the Institute for Cultural Evolution skew older, but we certainly have many young people, and we would love to grow our audience to include a younger demographic. But again, we're not spending huge amounts of money on marketing this. I've been building the organization now for over 10 years, and I'm going to continue to do that, including the platform and its tools like the one I just showed you. But I actually have turned back to writing my next book, trying to add to the body of thought, which is the fundamental philosophy behind our thinking, integral philosophy, it's called. And this will be my 5th book on integral philosophy. And so that's where I'm focusing rather than on analyzing our audience.
We had some, I want to just go back online. Steve, we had some people ask, somebody posed in the chat, they're working on a GPT on tech ethics, and they're wrestling.
On what? GPT on what?
Sorry, can you hear me now, Steve?
Yes, I can.
My
Okay.
microphone wasn't on. So in the chat, somebody asked, we're working on a GPT on tech ethics, and we're wrestling with the economics of delivering the service from an organization with a tiny budget. How have you dealt with this? What was the cost that you encountered? I mean, you don't have to give numbers, but this is something that we think about a lot as smaller nonprofits who are mission driven and working with small budgets. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or experience to share from that.
Sure. Well, when I contacted David Rosato, right, who I showed you in the slideshow, he's an academic. He's not a commercial developer. We did pay him some money, but our deal with him is not public. But anyway, it was not a huge amount of money. Anyway, we worked with him for about 3 months to train and finalize the three answers. We also used our very capable web developer, and we paid him for several weeks of work to create the website that then displayed the API, or the technical feed from ChatGPT. There's also the monthly data expenses, but those have been fairly small. Again, we have thousands of people who've signed up for this, but it's not as if it's going viral or breaking our data bank. So our charges from OpenAI are less than $500 a month. And the amount of money that we spent to create this was under 50,000. So again, we could spend a whole lot more money on this, right? We could create a fancy app for your phone. Right now, it's just a website, which you can certainly use on your phone. But again, we're not marketing it. It's a service. It's a nonprofit gift to the world. It's been uptaken fairly well, but even though we did get good attention from Fox and Wired, we expected that we would get better mainstream media attention than we got. But it's worth mentioning that apparently, this was not that impressive to the New York Times or, to the Wall Street Journal or some of the other mainstream outlets we contacted. But that's probably for reasons I don't understand, because I'm not deeply in the tech industry. Perhaps there's so many novel AIs coming out right now that just another one, even if it has unique and intellectually interesting features like ours does, doesn't qualify for significant media attention. So that's something to be aware of. If you're going to create a small AI, it would be, I think, unrealistic to expect to get much publicity for it free at this basis where we are in terms of the media's somewhat cynical view of AI.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Really quickly, is this tool open source? Is there a way to see into the back end of the algorithm?
That's a good technical question. I mean, the website is there. You can look at the code on the website like you could any other website. But open source has not been a big focus of ours. We have it here. We don't want somebody to just take it and duplicate it exactly. But we're not trying to protect it, and we're not making it secret. Again, it's a nonprofit effort. It's a boutique effort. So if folks are interested, we'll happily share. They can contact me by email, happily share what we know about it. But I'm not sure whether it's open sourced.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question in the room. I see a hand back there. There should be a microphone behind you, actually. Yeah.
Hi, Steve. My name is Nicole. I work with Search for Common Ground on the Common Ground USA team. I actually had a chance to use depolarizing GPT for a little bit like before this, so really enjoy the service. My question concerns in the beginning of your demonstration, you referred to yourself as the like the chief philosopher of your organization, and I really love that term. And I'm curious where has philosophy shown up for you in both developing depolarizing GPT and you talked about, I think, a certain type of philosophy that you were writing about. I would just love to hear more about that. Thanks.
Sure. Well, that's a big question, but I'll try to answer it as shortly as I can. The idea is that, like I said, we need to grow out of our current dysfunction as a civilization. And what that means is cultural evolution. So understanding cultural evolution in a way that it doesn't revert back to some, Victorian notion of evolutionism, but is, fully appreciates all of the very important insights that have come from the development of progressive postmodernism and other philosophical developments within our philosophical space. But the bottom line is that our main inspiration for philosophy is Alfred North Whitehead and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, both of whom were very focused on the evolution of consciousness and culture. Teilhard popularized the term the noosphere as this realm of human evolution that is transcending, including cosmological evolution and biological evolution. So understanding the evolution of the noosphere, how it is an authentic kind of evolution, but one that can't be reduced to biological evolution because of human free will. A culture is evolving because people are trying to make the world a better place. And our needs can never be satisfied because we have this creative imagination to imagine always how things could be better. So understanding consciousness and how it evolves along with the evolution of culture, and understanding that not in a linear way, but in an understanding that there are certain features of cultural evolution that make the world a better place, like equality of women or the end of slavery. I mean, there are things which are so unequivocally more evolved than previous states of the world that we want to put a stake in the ground and say, yeah, it's worth transcending relativism, and without going to the other side of any kind of value absolutism, recognizing that culture is evolving, and part of the way it evolves is by expanding the scope of who we include. So we're trying to draw the circle of inclusion wider beyond. I mean, progressivism, its emergence over the last 60 years as a significant worldview, it's made its evolutionary advance by being more inclusive, right? This is one of its great strengths. But ultimately, it's not inclusive enough to include those who don't agree with its basic tenets, which is part of the reason we have this culture war. So trying to draw a circle that includes progressives, but also includes those in the center and those on the right, at least those of good faith, is part of the way that we see culture evolving in the time ahead.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that thoughtful final response. Please everyone give a round of applause. I'm sure you can. You kicked off our first demo wonderfully well. So I'm gonna turn it over. Let me just spotlight this. So there we go. I'm gonna turn it over to the person to my right. This next session is going to be led by Lena Slackholder. She's Executive Director for Digital Peacebuilding at Search for Common Ground. And she's going to talk about Search for Common Ground's BridgeBot. This was a chatbot that was developed in partnership with Tangible AI. It's a WhatsApp-based chatbot that's designed to shift perspectives and grow skills in dealing with online conflict. So it acts as a companion to social media users. It helps them deal with differences of opinions, both everyday, cultural, political, and build skills around empathy and identity and nonviolent communication. It's been used more than 1,000 times in English, French, and Arabic since May 2023, and it's informed by Search for Common Ground's Common Ground approach. So Lena, over to you.
Okay, wonderful. And thank you, Steve. That was fascinating. I could see lots of potential for that. Thank you. All right. So let's share a little bit what problem we were trying to solve, what we did, and what we learned. So Search for Common Ground, largest dedicated peace building organization. We do all kinds of things that bring peace to where people are at, where they're living. We do music, we do theater, we do radio, we do reality shows. So we were really grappling with this question of like, how do we take this common ground approach, our signature conflict transformation approach that we know works, and actually bring it to people more easily, right? We had these 11 modules, and we were also wanting to understand to what degree are these skills around understanding multiple identities, power of empathy, perception, all the nonviolent communication, to what extent can we also tweak those so that it can help people to also be having that agency to transform conflict in the online space. So that was really our problem. More people and in a way that can be relevant for online. You know, and again, we had done a bunch of research where we understood that, you know, including and particularly in conflict affected countries, people were really struggling with dealing with conflict online. And oftentimes they were basically blocking people, turning off, and they just didn't feel as though they had that agency to say, hey, I want to be an upstander, I want to help, I want to mediate. They were feeling not that, that impetus. And it was just too important for us to be like, yeah, well, we'll just have to do another like 5,000 trainings across the world. So that's why we said to ourselves, how can we meet people where they're at, which meant on their phone, on WhatsApp? How can we make it easy and fun to learn about the common ground approach, making it relevant? And, you know, we asked ourselves, there's a lot of chatbots out there that, particularly under COVID, a lot of interesting innovations around mental health. And those were some of the chatbots that we found most inspiring, giving us a sense that, you know, you can almost be maybe even more intimate with a chatbot, to share, to learn, to feel as though you're in your own little space. And maybe those are the kinds of tools that can inspire us. So that's when we came up with BridgeBot. We could not have done this without Tangible AI, which they were here with us today. We'll certainly invite them another time. They had worked with social impact chatbots across the development, humanitarian, mental health, job creation. They'd just been doing this for a long time. And they knew how to train a bunch of people like these lovely women down there in our Sri Lanka team to learn how to build a chatbot. And it was really hard. You had to learn how to write a script in a way that was short, that was spunky, that had emojis. And it reminded me of my time, you know, working so much with radio and television drama writers. It's not anybody who can do that. So they coached us and they helped us to be able to learn how do you write a script-based chatbot. And we chose the kind of WhatsApp chatbot that is not learning and responding to natural language. Thus, it is, you know, completely scripted, and you have just menu options, and that's what you have to choose. So writing that and building that was in partnership with Tangible AI. You know, this is just a screenshot of, hi there, I'm a chatbot. We didn't give our chatbot personality as so. There's an amazing amount of choice points here, but we did, you know, identify this as a search for common ground chatbot. We're here as a digital mentor to help you to respond to the challenges you might face online, because your participation is an important part of building a healthy digital community. And now, after rolling it out about a year ago, we have it in 3 languages. We took that common ground approach curriculum, which was 11 modules, and turned it into 5 modules, lots of sub-modules, interactive games, quizzes, lots of emojis. We also, you know, offered people a chance to go to further resources, because there's excellent existing resources about working online and, you know, mediating online conflict. Braver Angels has a beautiful course, for example. Each thread wasn't more than about 5 minutes. And we still learned that that was still an ice age for some of our users, and they were not going to put up with that. And then we had an evaluation. When you finished like each module, we asked people if they wanted to do an evaluation and give us some feedback. And most people were not at all interested in giving us any feedback. And most people didn't make it till the end of the module. So just very quickly, I'll just show you about 30 seconds of what this looks like, one of the modules. Let's see if this works. Thanks for your patience. So the menu comes up. And then you can start, you can click, one of the adjustments we made was to give people a sense of how long this module was going to take. This is kind of exploring identity. And you guys can read this, yeah? Yeah, okay, just let you go with it for a little bit. So we, design these ways for people to sort of practice, try something out, and then learn, because in the Common Ground approach modules, it's experiential. The whole training is experiential. So we try to make something experiential through the WhatsApp chatbot. You can see a little bit of the tone. And then try and bring it back to, so what you just did, remembering that not all identities are visible. That can also affect you. And then how do you show up online when not all your identities are invisible? And then, you can go and take a quiz. And then, and then there was other modules. I'll stop in a second. Quizzes. And we had other modules about like filter bubbles. So that's how it basically worked. And let me go back here. Okay, so just a couple of very quick stats. So we launched it about in May last year, but we only did marketing in the last few months. We've reached about 1,000 users, but only 154 of them actually finished a module. So they would, and you can see here on the bottom that where they started a module and finished a module. The other advantage of why we chose WhatsApp was because there's a huge backend data. So we could even see where people were going in the script. So the idea was that our teams would be extremely you'd launch it, you'd be iterating, you'd be understanding where people are blocked as they're using the chatbot. And we were able to see again where people were from. And most of this, the higher numbers from Kenya, Sri Lanka, and Nigeria was because our teams did in-person events. So even the online marketing that we did in the last few months ended up reaching very few people. Again, these were good evaluation graphics from the handful of people that bothered to fill out the evaluation. So I wouldn't give it all that much credit. And then here's what we learned. Okay, so firstly, the conversational design was hard. It took us a long time. And if we didn't have tangible AI to constantly rewrite it for us, I think we wouldn't have succeeded. The second thing is that, and the technologists in the room will understand this, the product launch is like the step 0. It really is just put it out there, learn, test, iterate, adapt. And I think that it was tough for our teams to put it out and then to immediately think about breaking it again. It was like, I have just cooked this special meal. How do you want me to dismantle it? And so it was tough for people, even when they were seeing that the engagement wasn't, or some modules, people never got through it. It was tough for them to rethink it, turn that module into a flashcard, right? And so we struggled to make use of the user data, even though we had tangible AI guiding us, telling us what to look for, etc. And sometimes I think people were too attached, coming back to my radio drama writers, it's not always them that can best adjust, that character arc, because they can get a bit too attached to it, right? So there was something that in that creative ownership that I think our team struggled. We did, we hired marketers to do it, but I think, here we are as the peace builders in the room will know that we will not win a lot of awards for marketing. We're pretty bad at marketing, right? And I think that was still true, even with this product. Although some of the ads that we put out were, kind of hilarious. And we did, we had ads about like, are you fed up? Do you hate everybody online? Well, choose Bridgebot, but even the angry people somehow were not clicking through our modules. Again, most of the usage came when it was in person. The other thing was that as we were getting towards the finish line, ChatGPT emerged. And so then the minute we started to promote it, people wanted to like ask questions to Bridgebot. And Bridgebot was this like, simple chatbot. And so it frustrated some of the users right away, and they felt it was suddenly inadequate. Would I do this again? Can it still be useful? And what other ideas did it spark? I don't know if I would do another chatbot because I'm just intrigued by using LLMs. And I think there's totally more potential there. So if I had a little time on my hands, I would go there. Can this still be useful? We've got this thing which really gives out key, core, simple lessons about what is conflict, identity, perception, nonviolent communication. I think it can be a useful educational tool, onboarding tool, helping the partners that we work with across the world to know how we think about conflict, while they're riding on the bus to work or something like that, right? So I think it still can be useful. And maybe, there can be some amendments to some of the modules, or, there can be a way to combine it with the other kinds of training that we do. And again, what other ideas did it spark? It sparked, I think, the necessity to understand user behaviors better. It's a lesson we constantly need to learn, right? Each time. We need to do more testing. We need to do more adaptation. And I think those muscles they need to be practiced. And we practiced a bit, but I don't think we got it enough. Interesting, when I talked to Tangible AI a few days ago, my last comment, I said to them, where do you land on this? And they said, sometimes chatbots take a while. You might be surprised that like maybe November this year, there's going to be a community that's just starts sharing it. That, it picks up on something and likes it. And so, it's still alive. It's on turn.io. And who knows? So thank you very much for listening, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lena. Questions? Again, I see one here. You should see, there's a microphone. Could you? And one on your own. Oh, you got one. Okay, perfect.
Hi, thank you so much for giving us the demo. I had a question. You talked about the dual dynamic of trying to understand user behavior, but then also working with Tangible AI developer, and they were guiding sort of your thinking about what to look for and how to iterate on the model. How do you work within, as a peace builder, trying to understand user behavior and using your own methodology for that, and then also having to comply with what Tangible AI, and it said that they're working on a social impact chatbot, so potentially they have some experience working in the social impact space, but given they were guiding your own process, how did those power dynamics end up in your product?
I have a lot of appreciation for how they have a step-to-step process to teach people how to do this. And I think it was really from our side that we were in a hurry. So maybe we didn't do enough user experiences. I think the team we were working with, they were not chatbot fanatics. So it took a while for them to even understand what it is we were trying to build. But I think, and I also paid attention to it because I understood that might be the power dynamic. And so I think we avoided that. But I think you're right that people, because they feel unsure of themselves and like they have to follow someone's instructions, the risk that you're pointing out is a real one. But I don't think that was really the root of our problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Lena, I was listening to that both for what you did and for the other tools you could have used, but I had before and after questions. Could you intentionally recruit people more intentionally than you probably did, more important is we begin to think how we could use these kinds of tools in the US. Did you think about providing, okay, you finish this thing, what do you want to do next? What are your, if you want to pursue this further, could you, for example, get in touch with the search office in country X or call Liz at AFP? And so, I mean, it's really, it's, you're putting, call Liz. It's really, how does this fit into bringing people into the stream and then providing them with outputs after they're done?
You know, we actually had a whole year where we had hired the wrong team completely. So we hired another team, which was, you know, people who were understanding the common ground approach and someone who was in tech in Sri Lanka. And I think, again, I don't know if we could have gotten a better team, but it was still hard for them to really build a chatbot that would speak in the right tone to people. I'm not sure I understood the second question, because we did curate all these resources. So the chatbot experience enables people to go to other places to learn more. Yeah, it does. Yeah. And in fact, one of the things that we did also, we were capturing was how many people clicked on, you know, getting to other resources. Because, you know, if anyone asks the question, well, how do you know if it matters? It's difficult to know if it matters, right? Even if you were able to say we got, you know, 85 people to download resources, again, it's still just one leg of the journey of transformation and people taking up these perspectives. Yeah.
So
I don't think we harmed anybody though. Yeah, I don't, and we could have harmed people. We didn't like piss off people. We didn't start to get canceled because we had like inappropriate examples, even when we translated into French and Arabic so far. So I hope we don't, you know, so far that's good actually, that we didn't do harm, right?
So some online attendees, Lena, are wondering, is there a limit on where people in certain countries can access it? What is the logistics for people located with like different country codes?
Oh, no, it's just, I'll put the link in to the chat. It's on, you just click hi, and then it starts on your WhatsApp chat. And it's in these 3 languages.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm gonna go.
Maybe go,
Did
yeah.
you ask in the last one?
No, I also work with Lena, so I can ask her
Okay.
separately. Maybe go again.
Yeah. Just if you could just hand the microphone.
Hi, question about audiences and users in areas that don't have Wi-Fi, but are very adaptable to using tools such as this one. Is there any way to provide that tool outside of the Wi-Fi? No mobile, no data. I do not provide either bundles if I'm in Kenya in a rural area or in Sri Lanka in a rural area.
No, this was,
I think our microphone.
yeah, it was about, does this work for people who don't have Wi-Fi? No, it wasn't designed for those users. Want to just take Shane's question quickly?
Okay, it's green now. Lena, thank you so much. And it's amazing the timing, right? Right before GPT. It's like completely out of your control. But you said something that really caught my ear about marketing. And you said that peace builders tend to not be excellent at marketing. Can you share like why? And and also maybe what's an example of a peacemaking focused company that has done it really well, that may be leading the way? Does one come to mind?
No, I mean, I think that, you know, the Alliance for Peacebuilding with Frameworks Institute has done a whole piece of work over the last few years to understand why peace is so poorly understood, accepted. It's not aspired to as a concept. So there's a real challenge, right? And I think that that when I look at my colleagues across the world, that they are convinced that this is good, something good, and that they're assuming that there's all these good seekers out there wanting to just do something good. But that's not really how marketing works, right? That's why I was kind of intrigued by the like, are you pissed off with everybody marketing angle? Because I think you got to understand what people's pain points are. And you have to understand what it is that they're aspiring to, or is it the reputation, or is it, what are they going to gain from that, you know? And I think we struggle with that because we're so convinced as practitioners, I'm talking really peace building practitioners, that we are helping people to transform conflict. And it doesn't always speak to the people who are right in the middle of that conflict. It sounds ironic, Shane, but it's a really important point. And I think that's why, I'll just end on a positive point, it's why we really need to work with technologists and other sectors and marketers to be able to popularize these things. And I mean, even with, you know, Steve's depolarizing GPT, you can see with, I mean, Steve, I love what you're doing, but you're not also that interested in popularizing it, right? In fact, it could be really exciting, but it would have to be framed in a completely different way, right? It would have to be really framed in a different way. So I just hold that question, Shane, because it's critical to how we popularize these tools.
Thank you so much, Lena. Great point to end. Here's Okay, awesome. So we're going to jump back to a few virtual speakers. And our next session will be on the Acquaint platform. So just a bit of background on this. The Acquaint platform is an online platform that uses LLMs or large language models to build intercultural understanding and collaboration skills to combat prejudice and hate, spread empathy and understanding, and create collective action for positive impact around the world. So we're going to hear from Catherine Mahone. She's the co-founder and CEO of Acquaint, and Alex Zabenyi, who is co-founder and CTO. And they're going to explain how the platform is equipping volunteers or users of these platforms who engage in one-on-one conversations with each other with these skills so they can bring them back to the local communities and organizations. Acquaint volunteers interactively practice skills like using I statements, posing open-ended questions that promote active listening, and navigating topics of disagreement, all while getting feedback from chatbots that are trained on these principles. So the Acquaint team is going to explain how these trainings enhance intercultural dialogue and peace building, some of the challenges and best practices that emerge in their efforts, and using this tool to audiences in more than 100 countries. So with that, Alex and I think Catherine will probably start. I'm going to bring you up on the screen. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I can start. And we're just very excited to be here presenting alongside so many amazing peace builders. So thank you so much, AFP. Thank you, everybody who's joining. And also thank you to our amazing volunteers who are also going to share with us, and to those of you who are in the audience. So I am going to share my screen because we have a presentation to share with you all, as well as the demo. So yeah, this is just going to be, we are going to share a brief overview of the Acquaint platform, but most of this will focus on a series of brand new LLM trainings that we have created for volunteers to foster communication skills, things like asking good questions, active listening that can really boost people's personal and professional growth and help them be leaders in their community and bring those skills back to their local communities. So Alex, will you start by telling us about some of the problems that we are working to solve through these modules?
For sure. So at a high level, I think one of the biggest problems we're trying to solve as Acquaint is really a lack of quality communication, pretty much in every context. And there's so many different costs associated with this, whether it's, I think this example in the bottom right here, supposedly, according to a recent report, it's costing the U.S. $2 trillion every year, just ineffective communication, and that's U.S. corporations, amounting to about $15,000 per employee. So this ineffective communication, whether it's violent conflict or failure to solve global problems, is a huge issue, and we think the only way to really effectively solve that is if more of us are stepping up to have intercultural dialogue, or really also training our communication skills. Now, to train that many people in communication skills, we need to have, first of all, really good, really efficient training. And right now, there's a lot of limitations on the existing trainings that are out there that can be kind of enhanced with LLMs. I also think this quote from the United Nations is really great which highlights why doing this is important. Really, they're saying improving communication lays the foundation for solving, I mean, pretty much any global problem. They all require collaboration, and that's exactly what we're aiming to do.
And so just a brief overview of our platform. So Acquaint is an intercultural dialogue platform where really anybody from across the globe can volunteer to be a peace builder. And we want to be able to include as many people as possible in this platform, as many different perspectives. And so Acquaint volunteers connect for one-on-one conversations to learn about each other's lives. And we sort of have a flow chart here that shows how we see this progressing. So volunteers train these skills. They become really great at communicating and many different techniques, which we're about to talk a little bit more about. But then they apply those to the one-on-one sessions. So it's not just learning through text. You're taking what you learn and you're applying it to real conversations with real people across the globe, which really just cements the learning that much more. And then after that, all at the same time, many of the volunteers have been part of Acquaint for months, but they're also applying what they learned to their local communities and our leaders. And just in conversations and relationships and workplaces, these skills all come out. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot to mention, we like to say that Acquaint is a global force of intercultural bridge builders. And we have some DALL-E generated images throughout this presentation, which I think are really cool.
So to get into a little bit about the tech that we're using and what we're trying to build with LLMs, in a sense, we're kind of building a sort of Duolingo for soft skills. We want to build really fun, interactive trainings that are really engaging for folks, but also very accessible, easy to use. And we really think that these kinds of communication trainings need to be very free for everybody. So imagine, I guess, probably existing active listening trainings or communication trainings that you might have done in the past, where you might get a question and you'll type in an answer. It could take you a week to get kind of some feedback, maybe from a teacher, or if you're lucky to be in a program where you have a live teacher, those can be pretty expensive to do, and they don't necessarily scale very well. So what this allows is for you to get really a personalized communication coach for these skills, where you get immediate feedback. You get a lot of, because of the automated nature of it, we can build in a lot of gamification that makes it more fun. We can keep track of your scores. We can give you badges or medals for your accomplishments in completing these trainings. And they're really, it's really easy to scale these things. We really hope to get, millions of people helping have intercultural dialogue, ask questions, and learn about people different from themselves. And these trainings are capable of scaling to those numbers at a very low cost. So I think Catherine's going to get into a demo on the trainings now.
Yes, so these trainings are brand new, by the way. They're just released last month, and so far we have 2 of them. And the one I'm going to be demoing here today focuses on asking good open-ended questions. And so the layout of these trainings, basically, the volunteers will see this page, which provides just a brief overview of the skill that's being focused on, as well as some steps to complete the training. So I'm going to click on the Start AI Training Challenge. And so you can see here there is a description of the skill. It lists suggestions and examples of open-ended questions and sort of explains why they're so good for fostering meaningful conversation. It gives examples of open-ended questions versus closed questions. So once you've finished reading about the skill and gotten some idea of how to use it, then you can click this Start New Round button. And what it's going to do is it's going to give me a scenario that I am going to react to with a question. And so it says here, Rajiv and Elena are creating a garden. Elena loves flowers and Rajiv enjoys growing vegetables. They want to make a plan together. Ask one question to help them collaborate and share their ideas for the garden. So let's see what happens when I ask a closed question, maybe a question that's not as good for encouraging conversation. So let's say, Elena, don't you like vegetables? Oops, if I can spell vegetables. All right, there we go. So now the AI is generating a response. It's going to give me feedback, and it didn't like my question, which is good. It says, try asking a question that lets both friends share their ideas for the garden without assuming what Elena likes, because that it wasn't just a closed question that I asked, it was also a leading question. Don't you like vegetables? Probably not the best for fostering discussion. So it says to try again. I did not pass that round, so I'm going to try again. It's going to give me the same scenario, and now I'm going to see if I can come up with a better question. So let's see. How could you arrange the garden in a way that combines both flowers and vegetables? And let's see what it says about this one. All right, I like that one better, yay. It says, great job asking an open-ended question that's relevant and encourages Rajiv and Elena to share their ideas. It also allows for plenty of room for elaboration. So you can see the feedback is instant, you get it right away, and so this is fresh in your mind. And again, a big part of Acquaint is getting people to apply these skills, encouraging them to apply these skills. So another thing we have is a quiz. And I won't go into too much detail about it now because I want to watch our time, but basically we are asking people to apply these skills to scenarios and either on Acquaint sessions or on their daily lives and report back what happened, what did they talk about, who asked what, and what was the result. So I'm going to go back to this presentation now, and let's see, Alex.
So we just released these trainings in the beginning of this year, and what we've seen so far is really an awesome response from volunteers. Volunteers are taking the training and really making it their own and running with it. And I think you're going to hear from a few volunteers actually in their experiences and what they've done. Our volunteers are really, I think, motivated to have impact in their communities and really do an incredible job. I think it's my favorite part of working with Acquaint is getting to interact with so many amazing people, and they've just done an awesome job, really, trying out the trainings and then going and applying them. We also, because I think one of our big questions is, are these trainings actually more impactful than a sort of more traditional training? And in general, we also ask, how can we make these trainings the best possible trainings they can be? And so we've built this entire A/B testing framework that allows us to basically run controlled experiments so that we can continuously improve the trainings. Our goal is to make the most impactful trainings ever, ultimately by continuously collecting data on a really diverse population and just iterating. Hopefully, well, eventually we'll get there. And so now I think we're going to hear from volunteers and what their experience was with the tool.
Yes, and I'm thinking I'll just call on each of the volunteers. We have 4 amazing volunteers joining us today, as well as Monica here, who's recorded a video to share with us. So first I will call on Jaleel. How about you?
Yeah, hi.
Hello, great to have you
Yes.
here.
Yeah, so I'm Jalil from Nigeria, currently studying in the United Kingdom. I've been volunteering with Acquaint for about a year now. Personally, I've interacted with the AI modules and it's been quite interesting. So I believe that these new AI modules equips individuals to be supportive and also to be able to interact interestingly with their communities. Just last week, Wednesday, I had a very long and exciting conversation with my friend Vivian, and who shared her interest in making comedy videos to be posted on social media platforms. So me applying the technique of these open-ended questions made her to share more. And I'm really glad that she was able to share, that she's really happy to, bring out her creativity and make people aware and, be a source of entertainment for the world. And then by so doing also get a side hustle for herself. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jaleel. And yeah, thanks so much for being here. That's a wonderful story. Gul, how about you?
Sorry, Catherine, who are we calling on next?
Gul. I was saying Gul.
Okay, perfect. Hang on.
Oh, hey.
I'm making him they're co-hosts now, so they should be able to turn their camera on.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for this amazing panel. I'm Gül from Turkey. I have been volunteering with Acquaint for 2 years. I think these trainings could be useful for promoting empathy and trust among people by supporting the understanding of others. Also, they could be helpful for having engaging and deep conversation with families, friends, as well as with people. And I used the asking good questions technique with a woman I met at a bazaar a few weeks ago. She told me how she had trouble finding a job and then got into making handicrafts, and how happy she was to be able to use her art to make other people happy. I was really glad to meet such an inspiring person and hear her story.
Thank you so much, Gul. And that's great how you inspired someone to share more about something they love. That's awesome. All right. How about Mamadou? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to speak up today. First of all, let me say my name is Mamadou and I am from the Ivory Coast. I've been volunteering with Equent for about 3 months now. And for me, Equent is such a powerful platform that I don't even know how to describe it, because it fosters a type of global citizenship mindset as far as I'm concerned. Now, I find Equent new AI training models, especially the paraphrasing section, to be very effective. For me, it has helped me to structure my thinking and therefore become an effective communicator. And as we all know, paraphrasing relies heavily on rephrasing information to foster comprehension. Paraphrasing is a valuable, I believe, is valuable in facilitating cross-cultural interaction or communication by reducing confusion, demonstrating empathy and respect, and establishing bond between people from various culture and background. So it was my pleasure to test the paraphrasing AI training model. And every day I try to apply that in my daily life, whether I'm interacting with people from my family or whether I'm interacting with people, volunteering on Equent. Even this morning, I was talking to a girl from Bolivia through Equent platform. It was such an amazing communication. It was such an amazing experience that I wouldn't even know how to describe it. So thank you for allowing me to share my experience.
Thanks so much, Mamadou. And I'm glad you mentioned the paraphrasing. That is the other of the two that we released. And I agree. I feel like I've gotten way better, just like more aware of these skills. So I think those of us on the founding team and the volunteers have already like benefited tremendously from this practice. All right, Ebenezer, how about you?
Oh, hi, Catherine. Hi, Alex. How are you?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I'm awesome. Thank you. So my name is Ebenezer. I'm from Kenya, and I've been part of Acquaint. I've been volunteering for about 8 months now. And one thing I'm of the highest belief is that the recent AI training that was rolled out on asking good and open-ended questions can be really helpful when you're trying to make people better communicators and collaborators. So I remember actually this specific instance last week on Friday and Saturday. We had a Liberty conference in Nairobi, and I clearly recall this one specific speaker is a lecturer on philosophy. He was very passionate about that specific subject, I think a bit similar to Mark here. And at the back of my mind, I knew I was going to talk to her, and I knew I had to ask a very open-ended question to have a better conversation. And my question was to know her thoughts on morality in consideration to its subjectivity and objectivity. That conversation lasted for about 45 minutes. So we talked about a lot of things in philosophy. And at the end of that conversation, she was very grateful for that I raised that topic. She considered a lot of things that she had not before, and I could generally see how happy she was that she talked about that particular area of interest. Apart from that conversation, I was able to have a lot of conversation, and I got to apply all the skills that I've learned in Acquaint, being genuinely interested with what the other person is talking about, actively listening, and to top it off, asking good and open-ended questions. And I was really glad that I had that training, because I was able to have some really meaningful conversation that was exceptionally engaging. And apart from that, I'm very grateful for this Acquaint platform and the team, Alex, Catherine, and all those behind it, to in the various training that they keep rolling out, those updates that they keep making to that platform, because, well, it has been really, really helpful to us volunteers. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. We're very grateful to you. I mean, the volunteers are really the heart and soul of Acquaint. So, you guys make all this possible. 100%. So thank you. This is so wonderful to hear from all four of you. I'm going to play this video from Monica, who was not able to be here, but also has a story she would like to share.
Hi, I'm Monica from the Philippines, and I've been volunteering in Acquaint since the start of this year. Recently, I tried their AI training on asking good questions, and I think that it could play a vital role in building stronger, more connected societies, because it trains the mind to set aside biases and develop questions that foster deeper understanding, potentially even motivating action. I have since applied this in my everyday conversation, and at one instance, I met this lady from Indonesia, and while getting to know her, I got curious what her job was and what inspired her to get into that role. So I asked, what inspired you to pursue a job in a child center? And she started passionately sharing about her work with children with special needs and the challenges that they are facing. By the end, she was so happy about it that she even thanked me for the opportunity to talk about it. I think that my question allowed her to revisit her passion and amplified her purpose and motivation.
I think a theme that we can clearly see is just how happy you can make somebody when you ask them questions and show that you're listening and show that you care to learn about what they have to say. Alex, what are some of the challenges that we've encountered? And yeah, once again, just thank you so much, all of the Acquaint volunteers who shared. That was amazing. Definitely like the best part of this presentation, I think, so far.
For sure. And so some of the lessons learned, from doing this, we found that prompt engineering, so really constructing the prompts for the large language models like ChatGPT, is a lot of hard work. You definitely don't need to be like an engineer or a data scientist to do it. Anyone can do it. It's a skill that can be developed, but it requires a lot of testing, a lot of diverse testing. And I think one of the reasons that was talked about a little bit before is there can be a lot of bias in the large language models, like cultural bias. I think an example, I was trying to send an email to someone with the title chief in Bhutan, and I had no idea if there was a certain way I should address them. ChatGPT got it completely wrong, and I was talking to one of our volunteers about it, and she said so many things with Bhutan don't work with ChatGPT, and so that creates definitely some challenges for building these tools for our community, which is at this point over 100 countries. So constantly getting feedback about what's working, what's not, is really essential. Even if it's a very specific group, I think constantly getting feedback is really critical. And yeah, these are also exercises only. The lack of nonverbal cues, like tone, it's not really a natural interaction, and so it really is kind of like a brain training, an exercise. But we really think it's critical to pair this with the hands-on, real live one-on-one intercultural dialogue sessions, or getting out there and using these skills.
Alex, you want to talk about broad and free? I hope we're probably close to the time limit. We're almost done.
Absolutely. So Yeah, there's a lot of different use cases for these that I think really I think a lot more organizations can start taking advantage of these tools. Again, I think I've encountered some misconceptions that they're really advanced tech and you need to be like an engineer or a scientist to start developing with them. But there's in this case I think many members of our team have built really awesome trainings already that don't necessarily have previous technology experience. We can build all kinds of role playing based interactive trainings. I think I just heard about one that was really coaching people to talk to loved ones that they think might be prone to extremism, which is a really interesting use case. But all different kinds of trainings, or negotiation, I think is one that a lot of people are looking at that could be really powerful, especially as we get into real-time coaching. If you get instant feedback on a question during a conversation, like, hey, maybe you should try asking that question in a way that's more open-ended. There's a lot of different powerful things we could do there. I think another use case for like businesses, a lot of times in sales, things like dealing with objections, but there's a million different use cases. Our suggestion is really ignore a lot of the hype. There's a ton of hype around these tools, but it totally makes sense to start using these tools in your own lives for your own personal workflows. And that will really give you a good idea of how they might apply to your organizations as well. I think it's a big risk to try to come up with a large language model or like GPT strategy for your company without constantly using the tools on a regular basis. And there's no reason not to, because there's so many different use cases.
All right, and so we just wanted to, there's way more names than we could list on here, but we want to thank all of our team members who helped develop these modules. Yeah, all the people who really made this possible. So with that, and also just our ops team members I know are in the audience, Sarah, Yehuda, Solomon, and Zainab, thank you so much, as well as some of our other awesome volunteers who have joined. So we'll open it up for questions now. Yeah, let's see. I know we have some in the chat, but Nick, did we want to ask?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see some here. Let's call on, we have a few minutes for questions, but thank you both, Catherine, Alex, and all your volunteers. It was a fantastic overview and very interactive, easy to digest. I love the piece of ignore the hype, but test it out for yourself and learn from experience. I couldn't agree more. So Catherine, if it's okay, are you able to stop sharing your screen so we can put your smiling faces on our face there? Wonderful.
Yeah.
I see a question there. There should be a microphone.
I see a question that I'd like to answer if that's okay here in the chat.
So we have one person in the room we're going to go to, and then we can jump to that.
Okay, perfect.
How much of the app you design, I guess it's an app, feels like it could be really useful in formal education, in K through 12 settings, higher education, adult learning? How much of what you're producing and some of the other demonstrations we're seeing today are already available in settings settings and sectors that maybe we just need to be like harvesting what's out there that's built by others for other audiences and repurposing it? I'm not dissing inventing any new things as much as I wonder what we're not taking advantage of that's available because we just don't know about it. But maybe if I called a school system, they'd say, oh yeah, we have a technology we use to teach kids how to ask thoughtful questions.
That's a great question. And actually, I think one of the cool things about Acquaint is we're not only using LLMs to enhance existing training, so we're not really reinventing the wheel. We're kind of building on existing trainings, but we're making them immediately interactive with LLMs. But we can actually test these doing controlled experiments right on the platform to continuously improve them across many different cultures. Unfortunately, many of the trainings are really geared towards a Western audience. They're not particularly inclusive. That's because Western countries funded them, developed them, tested them on Western people. And so by building these trainings and really testing it on a truly global audience, we can continuously make them more inclusive and make sure that we're expanding them. I think also coupling the communication skills training to an actual interactive hands-on component is really essential. It's kind of like if you read about a sport in a book, but then you never practice it. It's not going to do you too much good. I mean, it might help when you actually go play it, but we're really trying to couple the hands-on training with the actual using those skills. But that's a great question.
Mm-hmm. So I did want to, somebody asked in the chat if this was open to the public, and yes, and I think, oh, nice. I see some people putting the links. So to be able to volunteer with Acquaint, you do have to go through a training. You sign up, you do an onboarding. There's like some mentorship. Usually the whole onboarding process takes a few hours. But once you complete that, you can start connecting with people on the platform. Yeah, so very much open to the public, but not immediately. You have to do a little bit of work to get there. Let's see, what else do we want to answer?
Any other questions in the room? Maybe somebody who hasn't, Shira? Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much. This is
Go green for you.
Green, go there.
hello. Thanks a lot. This was fantastic. One thing I'm curious about is, do you spend time thinking about how to get people to use this service who might not otherwise be inclined to want to learn how to ask good questions? Or are you more focused on the, like, there are a bunch of people who want to, and we're going to support them, and we're going to, teach them as much as we can?
That second one, yeah, definitely. We really think that the best learning outcomes are achieved when people are motivated and want to. And I think there's just a lot of low-hanging fruit for trying to give more opportunities, more pro-social opportunities to people who want to help. But yeah, that's a really good point. I know there's a lot of programs focused on kind of reaching people who might not want to engage with this sort of thing. And I think certainly that there's a lot of value in that too.
Yeah, great question.
Well, we're running up on time, so I think that we can use that to close your session, but a huge thank you to Catherine and Alex and all the volunteers, and thank you for your work so much.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, all right, so we're gonna jump over to our last segment. Sorry, Caleb, I know I said you're in the second block, and it's probably caught you off guard, but. Okay, so for this is our last segment before we go into our break. So I promise a break is coming. You'll get up, stretch your legs, have some food. We're going to talk about automatic classifiers for peace. So here we have Caleb, how do you pronounce your last name, Caleb? Gachui. Caleb Gachui, who is the Africa lead for Build Up, which is a very valued member of Alliance for Peace Building, and they are really at the forefront of a lot of work on peace tech. And he's going to provide an overview of Build Up's automatic classification systems for peace building and mediation. And this is a really interesting case study of a number of organizations that work together to create a dangerous speech dashboard from Nigeria. It was developed by Build Up and local partners to inform digital peace building in the country. I think this is as practical as it can get. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Caleb. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. And I think what I'm going to do is just walk you through a process of how we've been working with different actors. And it's not really a technology tool, it's more of a process that ends up in a product that can change differently depending on the context. So, all right, so the major problem we're trying to address is, this was discussed earlier on when we started, that we cannot ignore work that is ongoing in the online spaces, just because we've seen the interaction between the offline and the online, where narratives end up showing up offline and vice versa. However, with this realization, we have another problem, that we can think of the solutions as going into these spaces, collecting the data, but we are peace builders. We don't have tech systems integrated within our organization. We don't have tech departments, and even the skills themselves are lacking. And I think some of the examples here, what you find is peace builders actually going out to work with tech companies to develop a product and then bring it back into their own organization and then try to run it. Now, what the challenge with that is, you're constantly looking at the tech community to sort of think like a peace builder, and you're always trying to interface with them, and new challenges are showing up every day. And the what we've seen in conflict is it changes very fast. So, and tech, as well, as much as it changes very fast, just tweaking some of these tools and systems is not as easy, because then you tweak one thing and you change the whole system, introduce a new dynamic. So an example of what we've seen in this type of space, so just to give you an example, is you have Peacebuilders. This is a program we're doing in Sudan, and we were trying to understand posts on social media that were basically advocating for violence and those that are advocating for solidarity. And the first thing is we were able to go out, collect this data, and we ran up to 385,000 posts. So that's a lot of data for a Peacebuilder to start thinking about, what do I do with this? How do I skim all the data? How do I manage to understand what is actually happening? And then we ran a simple classification system, and we actually realized only 3.4% of the data was relevant. So it's a question of, we have a lot of data, but how much of that data is relevant for our work to be able to make informed decisions? And we've seen this narrative quite a lot, where people say it's only a subset of social media that is actually being amplified with algorithms or by the design that then reaches the public, and people say social media has a lot of hate, right? So this is something that I'm sure we've come up against. So this is basically a simple classification that we were running. And the idea was just to say, well, if you have these phrases or these words, then classify as this. And that means that the Peacebuilder can now start looking at the relevant data, as opposed to trying to swing through the 385,000 posts and end up looking at cartoons and cat videos. So when I say we, who do I mean? So this is a group. This is now the automatic classifiers for this. This is a group of researchers, engineers, and Peacebuilders who have come together to say, well, we have some skills, we have some time, and we have some knowledge to be able to implement this type of content and actually see and test it, whether it's going to work. And there's also the advanced tools that are actually now readily available, ChatGPT, GPT-4, when it came out, people are now thinking, how do we use it for all this type of work? So it's readily available. The cost is not as big as 5 years back. And then another reason for coming together is also to collaborate, to build classifiers, and basically work with global North and South. And this is quite important, because if you work in the global South, you start to realize that there are some tools that get rolled out in the global North, but they don't make it to the global South until 1 year later, right? So in that point in time, that tool which was useful at that point in time, maybe in a conflict, would have really helped solve a lot of challenges 1 year ago. But now we're in a conflict, and these tools, would have been useful, but just because of zoning and technology laws and all these things, sometimes those tools don't move into these communities. And then we're trying also to focus on under-resourced languages. In some of the contexts that I work in, think of coding in Hausa or in Swahili. It's mind-boggling. Or looking at content that is polarizing and it's harmful and it's targeting a minority, but it's in a completely different language that ChatGPT has not yet been able to to understand. And then trying to also keep it open source, so that the data that we build, the work that comes out of this group is actually shareable and people can actually use it. Because there's a whole department of academics who are saying, we wish we had more data, right? Not just data from the global North, but data from other countries, just to understand, do we experience polarization the same, for instance, in the US or in South Africa? So how does it work? A Peacebuilder comes to us and says, I'm struggling with this problem and I'm seeing a lot of content online. How do we address it? So we scrape the data for them, and then we give them a sample of the data set for them to annotate. And once they annotate, we run experiments. We check, and using this basically open LLMs, we are trying to check if the LLMs can then predict the same annotation as the humans. And then we actually make publicly available the experiment that has the best results. And then we deploy it now into the larger data set. So for instance, like in 385 posts, so taking a sample of that, annotating it, and then using that to deploy it up to the larger data set. So this is basically a sample annotation, just to try to make it simple so that even a Peacebuilder can actually just go through it. Because there are other ways to annotate data that are a bit more complex. So this is just read and consider the comment about how offensive do you think it is, and you have a scale. And this can focus on many things. It can focus on cat issues, it can focus on, I don't know, what do you think your government is pro or anti one thing. And once we have that data, is basically what the output looks like. You have the post ID, the text, and then is polarizing results that are done by human. And then now we take this information, run it through different experiments and different platforms, different LLMs, and what we're trying to do is to see if the prediction can actually match. And here, what you're playing with is percentages of accuracy, really. And you don't, and this is one thing that we've come across. So Peacebuilders, can it not be 100% accurate? And then you start to realize there's a gap between understanding how technology works and how reality works, right? Because in reality, you'll ask somebody, do you believe this? And they'll tell you accurately, yes, I do. It's 100% feedback, right? Yeah.
Just press the button so it's green.
I'm pressing the button.
Green.
Thanks. So if you're using human responses to test against the LLMs, I guess my question is, what is your baseline data when you're actually training those LLMs? Because if you're using this to, I guess, if you're using this to try to test the LLM itself, what is the, I guess, how are you training it so that you're not adding bias as you go?
Yes. So, and oh yeah,
some people lie.
all right, definitely. Okay. No problem. I'll just get one example also in Nigeria where we've done this, and thinking of the different languages that exist in a particular country like Nigeria, where you don't, I mean, with the existing LLMs, most of them are just in the general languages like English, French, and all that. So what we do is we cross different partners. So for instance, you have one organization and then you're working with multiple annotators and then who are looking at the same data set, right? And then they're cross-checking with each other just to see, first of all, do we agree on that this is actually polarizing? Yes, and then we're providing that now to test with the LLMs. And part of, and I'll get to some of the challenges with this type of content, because for instance, if you ask an annotator whether this content includes, well, this content talks about violence against women, that is very straightforward, as opposed to, is this polarizing, right? So just, and I'll get to that point in time in terms of what type of data is more challenging to work with when you're trying to annotate versus which one is more direct. Like, is this a cat video versus this is not a cat video, right? And just because conflict is a bit more sticky or murky or gray, as opposed to, I don't know, when you're marketing a product and you're saying, is this red or blue? Yeah. All right, and then other experiments that we're also trying to look at are, active learning open source tools, and just, I won't get into this, but these are also things that we're also working on. So I'll just jump quickly into the dashboard that we did for Nigeria. And what happened was, in Nigeria, we worked with an organization called CTAD, and they came to us and said, well, we're struggling with this type of information online, and we want to understand, is there hate speech? This is actually a very sticky point, like hate speech, which has been quite a debate, but not only hate speech, but is there dangerous speech? And this was, they wanted to look at the data from the election year, which was last year, because there were cases that people were claiming that there were incidences of violence that had started online. And they wanted just to go back in time and see what that looked like in that space, and try to see whether there was actual evidence on that, and also try and connect the dots to see, but without the knowledge of that data, without just understanding how they're able to annotate, it will just then be them swimming in a data set that is, again, like we've seen. All right. All right, so this is a sample, a dashboard, and again, it's open source. As anyone who's done tech work, we are using Superset on this one, so the dashboards are quite clunky. They're not as pretty as the commercial ones, but it just, it gets the work done. You can actually tweak it to look a bit better. So number of posts collected, 425,000 posts. Who can guess how much of this is relevant? 20,000 is irrelevant? Well, let's check. So if I select all of them and then remove the irrelevant data, and these are what we were annotating based on hate speech, dangerous speech, we are left with 46,000 posts, right? So now this becomes an interesting point of discussion just between the organizations that are working in this space to try and understand, oh, wow, so we've collected all this data, but this is the one that is relevant based on our annotation. We're not saying it's the source of truth. All right, and then you just have a timeline to show them and anyone who's looking at the data in areas of interest where you might want to look at, just because now the data has actually been sorted to look at the irrelevant and the relevant data.
And I won't get into a lot of the work. So also one of the things we were looking at was security information content in that particular context. But one thing you'll notice with this data set is it has 3 categories under dangerous speech and hate speech. So there's one where it was clear that everybody agreed that this was hate speech or dangerous speech. But then there were others that had low certainty or medium certainty. Just to tell, this shows you how people sometimes digest this type of information when you're working with humans and you ask them to annotate the data. And we just kept it there because we said, like I said earlier, this data is now public and we can share it with academics who now want to understand where are the areas of contention, where are the areas of division, where people say this is dangerous and somebody says, well, I don't think it's really dangerous. And we just realized it depends a lot with the, where they're coming from and how they're experiencing the situation. And even if the other day I was talking to Susan Benesh and she was saying, yeah, there's a framework, but even that framework, sometimes people look at it subjectively, right? So it really depends on who you're working with. So this is by topic. So we're looking at posts by topics, which topics are generating the most posts, which topics generated the most interactions. So this is quite interesting because some of the peace builders were saying, well, yeah, there's a lot of posts, but this one is generating more interactions. And this is the point that we really want. This is where people are coalescing as opposed to a lot of people are just putting out hate speech. Comments that topics that generated the most comments. And then they also wanted to look at emojis.
Just quickly, what's the security? What is that?
For the, oh, so security is any content online that was talking about security. So that one, and this is what I was saying earlier when it comes to when you're annotating data with peace builders, it's very easy to say this post is actually talking about security versus this post is hate speech. So one is very clear and the other one is quite debatable, just because of some of the stickiness of the issues. And then also actors by comments, which actors are generating the most comments, and then trying to see if we filter by hate speech, are these other actors we should be engaging in. And it continues with the top post by interactions. And here you're actually able to see the specific posts and read all of that. But then at the very top, you're also able to look at the specific actors now in detail, that actors that get the most interactions. And you're still able to filter by the date, the time, on the left-hand side, the page type. And page type is basically, is this a media page? Is this an academic page and all that, so that you're able to also actually see which actors are generating which type of content based on the data you've collected. Top 10 pages by post, top 10 pages by interactions, and which topics, if you want to match that by pages. And it all goes on. And then also we keep the raw data just because, like I said earlier, you'll work with one organization, they want a dashboard, another organization just wants one visual, and another organization just wants the Excel. And you're like, okay, fine, you do whatever you want. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Wow. So that was fantastic, thank you. I think this would have made my graduate capstone a lot easier, by the way, if I could have used it. I want to open up to questions. I do just have one question. I'm going to use my prerogative. How have you seen this? This is really good for like mapping out kind of like the state of dangerous rhetoric online.
Yeah.
How have you seen that to inform interventions on the ground? How have you seen it play out? Has there been impact?
Yeah.
I'd just love to hear a bit of that. Yeah.
So we've just started this work and we've done it in the US where we looked at data.
Just for
yes. So we've done this work in the US where we've looked at polarizing content on religion, and now in Nigeria, and we might be doing it in Sudan and in Nigeria. And what's the first thing that once you have the data developed and people are looking at the dashboard, usually the question is, so what now? Because there's a reality that kicks in that, okay, whatever we had, our ideas that there are a million posts that are, talking about hate speech is not true. So what usually ends up happening is trying to think of online campaigns. First of all, who are amplifying this type of content? Who are pushing it back online? Are there actors that we can work with as partners? And how do we recruit them or onboard them? In Nigeria, so currently what they're doing is they want to share this data with what they call community cells and work in the community cells to start showing them basically the realities of this. This is a content that you're all seeing, and how do we, if you were to push it back, how would you do it? As opposed, so basically crowdsourcing solutions that then they would basically push online. But now they have an understanding of what it looks like, as opposed to having one anecdote that is not. Yeah, and also breaking down the hate speech into the core grievances that people have, because now you're able to see people are talking about, this is a common type of topic that is appearing in the different threads of hate speech. So we're going to talk about, let's say, land grievances that are showing up during elections. So it's not really, I hate you because you're this, but there's a land grievance that is being amplified. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Questions in the room? You have, I think it's right there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is really interesting. My question is, have you seen this work being done to inform trust and safety teams at Facebook about, for example, these are the main actors spreading hate speech, these accounts should be shut down?
Yeah.
I know that would also, you'd lose a lot of data that can then inform what's happening, but curious from your experience if that's been a suggestion or something that's been done.
Yes. I'll just talk about briefly about, I know maybe some of you know about the Trusted Partners program, where tech companies bring you on board, and we have really a big problem with that system. But it's just because it's very extractive, and you never know what happens when they swallow all that data, and then they tell you, oh, this was done, and then that's it. And then there's no transparency and comes back. But yes, in terms of connecting whatever we are finding to those teams, yes. And one of the things is also trying to push for more engagement with them that is a bit more structured, as opposed to one-on-one engagement with one organization, saying, okay, you're in Nigeria, these guys are doing this work and they want to engage with you. However, you have other trusted partners who would benefit also from this, not just Facebook, because Facebook will probably just, I don't know, put a stamp on this is misinformation or demote a content, but the partners in the room would be able to address it a bit more effectively, I guess. So there is those links, but with certain companies and not all of them. Yeah. Yeah.
There's been some good thoughts in the chat, and we can go a few minutes over too before we cut to break, don't worry. Somebody asked, like, differentiating hate speech from dangerous speech, right? I think that's a big question. Second, has this platform been able to provide any insights on, like, which platforms specifically this type of rhetoric is spreading, like which, like, social media platforms, for example, and how is it taking that into consideration?
Yeah. In terms of differentiating between the two, I think there's a whole literature on dangerous speech that I mean, we can dive into that, but
you can give an hour.
Well, yeah. There's I mean, Susan Benish has done amazing work with this, where they have a framework, and or if you look at is it the Rabat? I've forgotten the framework in Rabat, but also has the points that when you're looking at content, whether it's dangerous or not, you think about the speaker, the medium, the audience. So if you meet, I think there are 5 thresholds. I can't remember all of them at once, but if that speech meets all those points, then it's considered dangerous. And that means as a speech that can be dangerous, but is not hateful. Yeah, exactly. So, so for instance, somebody says, let's meet at the Capitol. It can easily be dangerous, right? Because the speaker, the medium, the audience, and yeah. So, but there is a frame, the intention, yeah. So there is a whole framework that is used to differentiate between the two. Sorry, I didn't get your second question was about.
It was about, like, which.
Oh, yes. So with the automatic classifiers for peace, we try not to determine which platforms to look at, and we listen to the peace builder who comes to us and says, we are struggling, we know our context, and this is the platform that we use, and we think we want to look at this platform. So in Nigeria, it was Facebook. Now, if we went to another country and they said, we think these 3 platforms are important, then we'd actually have the 3 tabs for each platform. And otherwise, I would want to run it in Sudan, I mean, in Nigeria, but then I would just be bringing my own bias into that picture and saying, what about YouTube and what about WhatsApp? And then they'll tell me, well, you can check it, but we wouldn't, yeah, we don't think it's relevant. Yeah.
I think time for one more question in the room, if anybody has one. Yep. I think there's a microphone behind you. Yep.
Thank you. This is very interesting. And actually, at the Carter Center, they do something similar, trying to mine social media for mis and disinformation as opposed to the hate speech you're talking about. But I'm curious here, especially with the question of WhatsApp. Is that something, I know we have a lot of trouble because that's not really a platform that you can mine in the same way as these social medias. Is that something that you're finding solutions to, or is that something that you kind of acknowledge as a known
Yeah.
hole in the darkness?
Yeah, WhatsApp is protected by privacy, and the moment you start touching on that, then the whole question of ethics come into play. And same not only on WhatsApp, but also on some spaces on public platforms like Facebook. So there are some private Facebook groups that you cannot really touch. And so one of the workarounds, which is not really a workaround, is more to try and understand anecdotally what people are seeing on that space. Because if what we've seen is this idea of cross platform content moving from one platform to the next. And because then you find somebody wants to amplify it, they'll take it from WhatsApp and then perhaps put it on a Facebook group, right? So asking what people are seeing so that you're also trying to look for it on Facebook, either if it's present or trying to anticipate that it's going to show up. And you're always sort of trying to be prepared that there's this chatter happening on WhatsApp. Sooner or later, it might show up on our public spaces. What do we do? And if you think about even pre-banking, where people are like, we're heading to an election, this content will probably show up. What do we do before it shows up? What are the guardrails? So that's the way we're trying to have those conversations. And people will tell you, like, we're hearing a lot of conversation about XYZ or this person or this thing that is happening without necessarily naming people, naming names, and just giving a broader blanket about it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What a terrific session to wrap up before lunch, right? Okay, so we're going to take 15-ish minutes for break. If you go outside, you're going to see food, you're going to see some sandwiches and vegetables and cookies and things like that. Let's come back at like 2:15-ish, and then we'll begin with some buffer minutes. So probably 2:20 is when we'll officially kick it off. So folks on Zoom, don't leave. You can step away from your computer, of course, have lunch in wherever you're tuning in from. And we're going to put up a slide that says we're on break, but we'll be back in about 20 minutes. All right, thank you. Hi, Sylvia. Hi, Ano. Can you guys hear us? Oh, you can use your charger, by the way. It's just plugged in here.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, twice.
Yeah, if you could. We're gonna get started, guys, in a few minutes. We're just coming back from the break.
Sure. Okay, no problem.
Hi, folks online. We're gonna get started in like 1 minute, so just hang tight. Holding your hand.
Yeah. Okay, all right, welcome back. We're going to get started as Nick brings more people, dragging them away from the snacks. So the second half of our expo today, we're going to be exploring different ways that AI-enabled tools, digital tools can help us achieve a key piece in our peace building work, which is around inclusion, participation, the aggregation of diverse perspectives, and ways in which digital tools make that even easier than we could do without them. And so we're kicking it off today with a fantastic duo from CMI, Sylvia Thompson, who's a senior manager and has been focused on Sudan for quite a while, with Aino Pertola, who's a project officer there and for many years has been really focusing on how CMI as a peace building organization can be using digital tools to advance their mission. We're going to hear about something that's, really dear to my heart. Many of us know that Sudan exploded into war more than a year ago. And so I'm sure many of us in the room have been involved in different ways, trying to find ways to elevate the voices of people and make sure that they're heard and that their voices count as we look towards a future dispensation. So over to you and welcome. Sylvia and Aino.
Thanks a lot and good afternoon, everyone. I do have a slideshow, so I'll try to share my screen. Have I not? Maybe I don't have. Oh, yes, I do. Sorry. Let's see, should be seeing this now.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks a lot for the invitation to the Digital Peacebuilding Expo. I'm delighted to be here to share our experience from using Remesh, an AI-supported platform to convene digital dialogues in Sudan. And as Lena mentioned, this all came about after the war broke out on the 15th of April last year. And while it had been difficult to access different parts of Sudan before the war, it became even more difficult after the war broke out. And we had a huge influx of people that left the country. And there was really this great need to understand what were the new priorities. And also there was a lot of preparation going into how to create a more inclusive political process that wouldn't collapse in the same way that it had done just before the war broke out. So we convened a series of digital dialogues. And one was with women in particularly to understand their new priorities, but also to better understand how they felt that they should be represented in a political process once it did resume again. And the other group that we worked with was resistance committees and also youth, so sort of within that category. And here one of the key questions beyond sort of the priorities and the issue of representation was really how do you find a method for including the views from the streets when you have millions of actors that are quite diverse and also in a very flat structure. So we focus quite a lot in these digital dialogues in terms of finding mechanisms for representation that could be acceptable for all the different actors in a political, in a new political process. In advance of convening the dialogues, we did a broad mapping of new women groups, networks and alliances that had been established after the war, but also some of those who still continued being active before the war. And we had quite systematic sort of outreach to the different women groups and also to the resistance committees as well. And then we ran one synchronous session with a facilitator, all in Arabic, which was then followed by 1 week of asynchronous session. So the synchronous session means that it's real-time live facilitated, and you have the ability to really sort of adjust, come with follow-up questions, and you have that kind of real sort of aspect of a digital dialogue. While the asynchronous session is more like a survey because it's offline, it's not facilitated, but that is also then fed into the same material and the same data that which is then analyzed by AI. And based on that, we design sort of our follow-up initiatives based on sort of many of the priorities that came in and also fed a lot of that information to the official efforts led by the AU and IGAD and others. For those who are not familiar with Remesh, it's an American tool which can host up to 20,000 respondents at a time. And it's lifetime, as I mentioned, and really has this great ability to synthesize and analyze large quantities of data. And as I mentioned, it's something you can interact with while it's running, and you're able to adjust and adapt and sort of identify priorities and key messages while you are in the actual dialogues as well. It's all in Arabic, of course, because it was all convened in Sudan, but this just shows a brief sort of overview, and you have key questions in advance that sort of categorizes the different participants. And you see how the tool actually sort of synthesizes the information and provides sort of a summary of some of the questions. And this is only translated even within the tool from Arabic to English. So it's not perfect, but it's actually quite good. There were several challenges related to using the tool. We had predicted that connectivity would be a major issue. And we did what we could to sort of counter that issue, particularly through having that asynchronous session, which meant that participants could join in at the time of the day where the internet connection potentially would be better. But still it faced major challenges, and it only requires 2G, but many of the participants were struggling still to complete the entire set of questions. So based on that, one of the conclusions we made is that it is an incredibly useful tool when you have large quantities of data, but when you have these major issues with connectivity, it may be useful to complement it with other digital tools as well. And one of the things we did consider was to then have follow-up conversations by WhatsApp. Nonetheless, although we had issues with the connectivity, we were able to gather a lot of key findings, key recommendations. So we were still able to really proceed with a lot of concrete follow-up activities based on that. Another challenge, I think, was there was quite a few questions, particularly from the resistance committees, related to the tool itself. The women groups were actually less skeptical to the tool. And I think that was related to the fact that we already had quite well-established relationship with many of the women networks and organizations, because we had a long history of working with them and supporting a lot of their work already. With the resistance committees, as I mentioned, it's a completely different structure, and although we had worked with resistance committees in the past, we hadn't worked with them in such a systematic manner. So there was a lot of questions from the resistance committees in terms of the tool, what was the information going to be used for, although we had also done what we could to sort of prepare and inform about that in advance, but still a lot of questions arose related to that. And after the sessions, we also had several sort of follow-up meetings with many of the different groups to further actually explain the whole methodology and how the tool had been used and how we had used the findings from that, and also for us to actually feedback some of the information as well. So a key lesson learned was really that preparatory work is really important, both in terms of building that trust with the actors and ensuring that they understand the tool itself and what it is actually used for. But in general, we had very positive feedback, particularly from the women's groups. They felt that it was a very efficient tool and that you could discuss very complex issues and in a short time reach some sort of consensus. So I think that was really good, and even many of the older women that participated, who you wouldn't sort of normally think are so sort of tech savvy, they really appreciated the tool and what it was able to do. So that's really good. And then one thing we also learned, of course, is that the feedback loop is very important, that you need to, the information that you gather, it needs to kind of be fed back into the different participants groups, so they know what actually came out of it and what's happening next, and informing them about the next steps and how this is informing your work as well. I'll stop there to open up for any questions we may have, and also to Aino that for any sort of additional comment from her side, I think that she will join in at least on responding to the questions. Thanks.
Yes, maybe just thank you, Sylvia, for the presentation. And indeed, we're both here for responding to any questions that you might have. Sylvia, obviously more on the context and kind of how this whole process fed into the work that is being done in Sudan. I can support in responding to questions related more to the technical side of things. But maybe just on a more generic level, one important point on the technicalities, or two important points on the technicalities, is that while Sylvia said that REMES was quite a good tool for this purpose, regardless of the challenges that we faced within this particular process, connectivity and so forth. It was also, from the user standpoint, I will say it was really nice to use. It's easy to set up and easy to deploy, like from a technical perspective. And indeed, it can host the live conversations up to 1,000 people analyzing the results in real time, which is definitely a benefit if you wish to have like a meaningful engagement or interaction with the participants on the other end at the same time.
I see that. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No,
I
go
just
ahead.
see that there's a few comments in the chat in terms of the usage in other processes as well. And one of the key lessons learned from it being used in Yemen was exactly this, the importance of the feedback loop. So that's actually where we picked up one of these lessons learned and sort of ensured that we addressed this and made sure that everything fed back. And in Libya, it was quite a different process, because it was a national process which was led by the UN, and it was all televised. So it was a much larger process, you can say. And I think it worked a lot better in Libya than it did in Yemen, because in Libya there was an active peace process at the time, and all the information that came in fed directly into the official peace process. While in Yemen there wasn't an active peace process. There was a stalemate, and a lot of the participants, while the feedback from their side as well was very positive to the tool itself, but there was a lot of questions to what actually happened next and how was it used, etc. So that's an interesting sort of comparison.
And maybe one additional point to that is that also something that was different from the processes that we had in Sudan and the ones in Yemen and in Libya. So there was also, like, we only interact with the participants through Remesh platform. But according to my understanding, also in Yemen and in Libya by the UN processes, they had a WhatsApp connection to the facilitators, kind of having two channels of communication ongoing at the same time, which obviously creates a little bit more work, but can create another level of trust and trust and transparency to the process. While we were only interacting using Remesh, which in our case was a convenient choice to make, as there was the engagement through the participants through other means prior to the engagement.
I think that's a good point. And during the session as well, actually, a lot of the participants were communicating with me on WhatsApp, but more in terms of the issues of actually connecting. So not in terms of the substance and the discussion itself. And I see Lena has raised a question in terms of how many participants we had in the session. So we had around 100 at the most, but not all of them were able to complete the sessions. So it didn't reach the full potential, you can say, in terms of actually being able to host 1,000 participants. We had anticipated more, and I think the connectivity for sure was one of the major issues related to that.
Okay, thank you.
And in terms of the, oh, sorry, are we out of time? I just saw there's another question in terms of the target audience.
Okay, go ahead. And then I want to also see if there's some questions in the room, Sylvia. Go ahead and you can answer the question about the target audience. And then let's see if there's some other questions in the room.
Yeah, in terms of the target audience, for the women's session, it was women from political parties, women from women networks, alliances and organizations. And then the resistance committees, then it was broadly in terms of the different resistance committees throughout Sudan, we were really trying to reach.
Excellent. You know, when I listen to both of you, there's things that are necessary in this kind of process if you were doing it offline. And then here you are doing it online. And the question is, you know, how much easier it is, what new obstacles, you've made reference to that. But I think that's, you know, one of the real critical questions, is there going to be uptake on this because it makes us actually better? But let's go to the room and see if there's some questions. We've got one back there. And let's take this one here. Let's take 3 in a row. And then you guys can answer all at once.
Obviously, when we're talking in polarized and violent environments, sometimes there's issues with anonymity and willing to be forward in public and stuff like that. How were you able to handle that issue? Because, of course, the flip side of it is anonymity itself is problematic. So how do you handle that broad issue?
So my question is, what was the end output? Was there an artifact or something at the end that you took away or that people had access to that they could look at later? Or was this just something that happened in real time? And I was just curious what the final output.
Thank you. Mine was similar to the first. So how much prep work did you have to do or felt you had to do to make sure, and how much also did you have to actively facilitate in case things were becoming more adversarial? And kind of related, when you talk about building trust, like, were you doing this on the ground, or is it like, could we actually do this fully remote and in places where we actually don't have those kind of networks of partners already established? Thank you.
Okay, go ahead and offer some thoughts on those.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'll start with the trust question, which I think is a really difficult one. And I think with the women groups, because we had worked so long with women groups in Sudan already, we had a certain sort of reputation and foundation when it came to those groups in particular. But we faced a challenge with the resistance committees, and here we really tried to just reach out through sort of trusted contacts and networks that were linked to the resistance committees, and reaching out to the coordinators within the resistance committees and informing them about the purpose and what we were trying to do, and in this way tried to sort of build trust remotely, which as I mentioned already, was quite challenging. And in the end, we saw, of course, that the fact that we had over time worked with the women groups helped a lot in that trust building. It was much more difficult to build trust remotely, but I think to some extent we were able to do so anyway, and we were able to engage many of the groups and to still bring them in, and so it's sort of it was possible, but it's a lot more challenging when you do it remotely. And in terms of the feedback loop, so what we did was really to go back through the same channels with the information. So initially what we did with the women groups, as I mentioned, was to conduct a mapping and identify the different coordinators for the different women groups and networks, and then fed all the information through them, who then informed their networks and alliances and organizations. And in the same way, we fed the information back to the different participants afterwards. So it wasn't possible for them to access Rimesh afterwards to see sort of the outcome of it or what were the key messages, but because the way it's set up, you can actually see a lot of the findings and key messages while you are participating. So already you sort of get a sense of what's kind of coming out of the discussions. But ultimately what we did was to share the information, and we sort of drafted something based on the summary that came out of Rimesh, and then share that back to everyone, and also more specifically in terms of how we took that onwards. And for instance, one of the key priorities that emerged during the dialogues was the need for mental health and psychosocial support within the framework of leadership. for women's political participation. So this is something we picked up on and then designed a session for women in the diaspora, and it's something also we're now continuing to work on. That's just one example out of several. Maybe over to Aina for your responses as well.
Yeah, maybe just one quick addition on the trust question. I think just to continue on with Sylvia said, so it's on the one hand, so there was already some level of trust maybe towards our organization because the connections were there, there were pre-engagements with the target audiences, particularly with the women through throughout the channels, basically. But just more generally speaking, when building this kind of an initiative using digital technology, so then it's not just a question of building trust to us as an institution or an organization operating in the space, but then there also should be trust generated towards our capability to select the right digital tool to use, and then the company or like the digital tool that is being used as well. So the trust factor is actually multi-layered in this kind of a setting, because as an organization, we also do have experiences. This is just now just sharing from past experience. As an organization, we have experiences also where our stakeholders did not trust the platform that we selected or that we've been using in another context. So it's sometimes this kind of an element is extremely crucial, hence to take into consideration and take the necessary measures and be to build the trust and be communicative and transparent in terms of the process, the feedback loops and outputs, as has been discussed by Sylvia.
And just, coming back to that first question about the safety and the transparency and anonymity, do you want to just add anything else?
When it comes to, well, obviously, say just on a more generic level, so safety, transparency, and anonymity, they are key factors that need to be considered whenever implementing this kind of processes. And with Remesh, these are something that are provided. So the participants, they join anonymous. There's, well, I won't go into the technicalities, but there's no like information stored on them for longer periods of time anywhere. And therefore a kind of certain level of digital security can be promised or like can be guaranteed from that end. But then there's always the question of there's no 100% digital security, and then safety and security questions, they are also they relate to also the participants' end. So they are in the end, the participants also need to be kind of considerate of their own digital security and take the necessary measures. And then questions of transparency and such, they are both ways. So we try to be, as an organization, we try to be as transparent as possible. And then, as Sylvia said, so the platform enables a certain level of transparency as there are these results that are being generated while the platform is being used for the participants, so they can already get a gist of the results while responding to the questions that are being asked on the platform. But maybe that's just a short generic response to these questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both. Let's give them a round of applause. There may be some of you attending tomorrow's event on digital deliberative technology. We'll be talking more about Remesh, and I hope it is that CMI will come back and share more examples of using Remesh. It's really critical. So let's move to our next presenter, who I'm really pleased. Hello there, Matt. Welcome. So Matt Stempek comes from to us from as the founder creator of the Civic Tech Field Guide, and the Civic Tech Field is a little bit more mature than the peace tech use of deliberative technologies conversation that we've just had, right? And so it's really exciting for you to come here. Tell us a bit, where are we at on the learning curve on civic tech and engaging citizens to create trusting, participatory, meaningful relationships? And what should we be paying attention to as we think about how we adapt and apply those? So I know you have lots to share, Matt, so go right ahead.
Thanks so much. Yeah, the civic tech field's been around a little while, goes by different names, but I think we're only can be judged by how well we learn from what we've done. So hopefully we can all collaborate on that. And I think there's a lot of overlap with peace building, especially from the presentations that I've heard today. I'm just going to drop my links in the chat here so folks can drive along at home as well. Okay, so while I'm doing that, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Matt Stempek. I wish I could be with you in person today. I'm based here in Lisbon, Portugal, but I spent 9 years in Washington, D.C., and I really wish I could be there. My career has been basically civic tech, using the internet and whatever new tech is available for public interest goals. That's included, U.S. presidential campaigns, nonprofit tech in Washington, D.C., academia, big tech platforms like Google and Microsoft, trying to embed civic engagement in products that billions of people use. So basically just trying to, get towards public interest goals like peace building with any new resources we have available. My take on it is that we're often under-resourced in our fields. So anytime we can use tech as a leveraging point, that's great. What the Civic Tech Field Guide is basically a living library of those kinds of solutions. And we've been doing this since 2016. And it's now over 8,500 hand-categorized projects and organizations in the field. Don't worry, the digital participation platforms that I'm going to talk about today is a smaller subset of that. But yeah, you can find all of them there. This is me. My email address is matt@civictech.guide, and I'll drop the link in the chat. We also do research on top of all this. So the research I'll talk about today about digital participation platforms is one example where we use our database of all these civic tech tools to learn and see, our work is so important in these fields. And so how do we get better at this work? How do we learn from what's worked and what hasn't? And so this graveyard here on the right is an example of that, where we basically created a place where we can visit the projects that are no longer with us, especially those that maybe had a lot of funding or media attention, but still didn't work. And we also collect the postmortems that founders write, where they say what went wrong. And we want to learn, is there a certain category of thing that doesn't work, or how can we do it better or differently next time? And that's kind of why the Civic Tech Field Guide exists, is so we can get better at our work. So what I want to talk about right now is digital participation platforms. And, these can be explicit platforms like the ones on the right here. We've got a couple open source examples and a couple for-profit company examples. These platforms basically let people, like Rumesh, they let people generate ideas and vote on projects and work together and team up on initiatives. You can do participatory budgeting, so deciding where public funds go. Some of these platforms have modules to let people debate each other or co-author legislation sometimes. But generally, they let you participate in public life through digital channels. A lot of them are used in cities at that level. But this guide that I wrote with People Powered, is explicitly for anyone inside any institution or group that wants to engage the public and basically start shifting power to their constituents or the public for decision making. So we often consider them as distinct websites, but many are actually just, a process or a collection of tools that let us achieve that, public engagement. It doesn't have to be one brand, although sometimes one brand is really convenient depending where you're coming from. And so we did this research and kind of did an overview scan of just global participation platforms and how they're being used in different countries around the world. Because there's hundreds of them, as I mentioned, so it's kind of hard to keep track. We want to know, things like accessibility and security. Are there certifications for that? And in many cases there are. And then also, what features are available? What do they let you do as a citizen or a constituent? So a lot of thought has gone into these platforms. I think collectively they've engaged millions of members of the public. So, what can we learn from that over time? They tailor it over time as well. And yeah, so as I mentioned, the growing number, there's also more visibility. This actually is an industry, it's a business sector of the software world, is building these participation platforms. In Europe here, there's even a trade alliance for these companies, the Alliance for Civic Tech Europe, which I think is a great sign that this sector is getting more mature. And I mentioned there's also open source ones. I'm really big fan of these ones like Decidum and Console, where multiple different cities are teaming up to collaborate and build the software together so that no one city has to, maintain a whole software platform by themselves. So it's a booming area of development. A lot of people are using them and engaging on them. And depending on the use case, you might, need one or the other. And that's why we wrote this guide is I'm not, an open source zealot. I'm not a only for-profit person. I think depending on, how big your tech team is and what, you want to get done, there's different solutions for different needs. And that's kind of what this guide covers. We heard that distinct desire, and together with People Powered, we kind of wrote this guide to how to, select a platform, how to set it up, given your context and constraints. And then also just like how to run a truly participatory program on one of these sites or platforms in a way that actually shifts power and isn't just about participation for participation's sake. So this field is advancing really rapidly. Okay, and so I'll just go quick. This is the guide here, and you can see the URL here. I'll also put it in the chat. This is basically a free online resource hosted over at People Powered. People Powered also helped me connect with their global community to learn a lot more of different contexts. I learned about participatory budgeting at the local level in China. I talked to a group in Chile that used to build distinct platforms like this and now engages people entirely on WhatsApp to get over the hurdle of, having to register for another website. And a lot of their constituents they were talking to didn't have email addresses to begin with. So we looked at a really global mix of different ways people are doing this kind of public engagement. Let's see, just advance the slide. And then there's the Civic Tech Field Guide I mentioned. This you can see as like People Powered has this overall guide. They've also built an online course that's free and self-guided based on this guide. So you can go through it piece by piece. And People Powered also does annual ratings of the platforms now, which is really helpful, to begin to sort out some of these hundreds of offerings. The Civic Tech Field Guide, which I work on full time, is sort of a living library. Platform developers and others have crowdsourced all these different examples. And the one thing I'll highlight for this group is that you can use our advanced filters. So if you want to find a platform that's based in the country that you're interested in, you can do that. You can also filter for whether it's open source or not and things like that. And then there's usually direct links to the GitHub repository if it's open source. So you can go ahead and check out the code or fork the code. But yeah, and then lastly, I mentioned we do a lot of research and that lives there too. And you can also get contact information for the platform developers. So I wanted to leave a lot of time for some reflections on this space. And then also, of course, the Q&A and just discussion. Before I do that, this is just a link to our newsletter sign up. Every week we share jobs, new product launches, so new platforms launching, and features like that. And then an open community calendar of funding and events and conferences like this one. And so I'll just maybe reflect a little bit on this digital participation platform genre of technology and what we can learn from, over 15 years of work in this space. I mentioned, millions of people use these platforms. It's a real, substantial thing. It's, in the scheme of the world, it's not everyone, but it's not insignificant either. I think the most common challenges to setting these up are often, I mentioned the registration barrier. So just like getting people to sign up for yet one more thing. Many of us in the civic and public spheres and peace tech don't always have a huge marketing budget to compete with other apps. And so that's why I always get excited when I learn about groups that are using apps that people already have. Like I mentioned the WhatsApp example in Chile. It doesn't have to be WhatsApp, but this idea of engaging people where they are versus another platform. And the V-Taiwan example, which is a famous example out of Taiwan, they actually strung together a whole bunch of different tools to come up with a participatory process where the public and other stakeholders got to engage. And the process is really powerful, and there's been many case studies about it, but it didn't depend on any one platform. They were able to use lots of different tools. I think, though, the biggest impediment to this whole sector and field being meaningful is that many times the decisions that the public is invited to co-create on are either low-level decisions, like you can design a public park together, and not the really contentious decisions that are often more meaningful. And too often leaders of institutions, they want the participation, or they allow the participation, and they want to show engagement, but they don't always connect it to anything on the other end. And I've actually participated in some things like this here in Europe, where I weigh in, I take my time to fill out their forms and go to their website and sign up, and then it doesn't go anywhere. And I think that's a great way to burn communities that have already been burned before, and it makes it just harder to engage them next time. So I think it's really important that we connect any kind of digital engagement to a meaningful real world connection. There are some great examples of that. One just immediate one is Consul in Madrid. For a period of time, it was a digital platform, and if enough residents of Madrid voted for a policy online, it became the city law through the city council. And it happened about twice, I think, with 32,000 online votes for something. But that's just a clear example where your online participation is really meaningful. And participatory budgeting is another one. You know, you're spending real public money, and your online platform engagement helps decide where that money goes. So having a concrete connection. And then just some other great examples of these digital participation platforms. You know, AI keeps coming up, but this platform Polis, POL.is, Polis, uses AI to map the areas of consensus between rival stakeholder groups. So you can start really difficult compromise conversations from a place of actual shared values, rather than, as we think about social media and many forms of technology where we're often focusing on our differences. Polis has been used quite successfully in a number of different contexts to kind of hone in on that overlap in our values. And that's, I think, you know, also quite relevant for peace building. And that Polis team is also advising OpenAI now on some of their AI governance work, which gives me some hope for that. And then some other interesting platforms. There are some like Delib, like deliberative, and Popbox in the US that were actually designed by, you know, congressional parliamentary staffers themselves. So they're aware of how citizen engagement and feedback kind of sometimes dies in the bureaucracy. And they design their platform so that the internal tools for the people running the platform helps that citizen feedback survive its journey through the bureaucratic channels. So in general, I'm just inspired by this field, and you know, a lot of these platforms are building new features all the time and finding ways to, you know, find common ground between rival groups and basically help relatively small groups of people make decisions together in a better way. And then just lastly, reflecting on where these platforms might be going in the future. I definitely think this era of trying to get people to participate for the sake of it needs to end. I think we need to show the connection between people's engagement and something happening in their immediate world. I think you know, people are rightfully jaded by just being asked to engage with no connection to power. And then just another AI example, a lot of these platform developers are actively integrating AI features. And on the one hand, this could be a great thing. Many members of, for example, city government staffers, they're very busy. And if engaging the public means something like 40,000 pages of text comments from the public, it makes it harder to do that frequently. And if AI can, you know, adequately, concisely summarize the different points people are making, that could help us, you know, run these processes more often and engage the public more frequently. So that could be promising. But we also know that large learning models are not always great at their summarization. They sometimes look like they summarize something perfectly and actually left something out. And I'm worried that we won't always audit that and see that that happened. And the other major issue with AI, of course, is we have certain channels for public comment and public participation. And it's already increasingly easy to astroturf and spoof participation and engagement on those channels, not just with text, but as we're seeing more and more examples of with video, with audio, with voice. And very few of our public channels are currently inoculated and ready for that kind of thing. So I'm a little worried about that. I think we really need to bolster and rethink how we engage the public in this era of generative AI, where it's just very easy to make it look like there's a groundswell of public support for something there might not be. So I'm sorry for speaking so fast. I'm excited about this topic, but I want to, open up the floor to actually talk back and forth instead of me chatting with you. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Matt. If people have comments online, please go ahead and write them in. Let's take a couple questions in the room. Yes, Chip?
So, Matt, I have a history of asking unfair questions, and I'm about to give you the worst one I've ever given. It comes out of a discussion we had during the break, which you weren't at for obvious reasons. And we were talking about the potential for-profits in this space. And as we were talking, I forgot to mention there's a group called mediate.com, which has a European counterpart, iCoder, that comes out of the online dispute resolution world, and they're pretty clearly for profit. But as we think about partnering with for-profits, which I think we need to do, what has been your experience? Because some of the groups I know that you talked about, I know of as at least being vaguely for-profit. So what has that relationship been like? Have there been pitfalls that you would warn us about?
Thank you. I don't think that's an unfair question at all. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add, let me add one question as well. And then again, if others have questions, feel free. The idea of civic tech in democracy, I wonder whether or not more of them are based on kind of the idea of majority rule. And that when we look at Polis or others, that as peace builders, we should kind of lean into those that are specifically designed to try to surface that invisible common ground, those areas of consensus. So if you have thoughts there as well. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. So just on the private sector question, I mentioned I'm sort of agnostic depending on the context, and the question about data privacy came up in the previous session. I think that's maybe the most important factor here. But I also see there are often benefits for private sector companies selling these platforms, and public benefits. Just one example, there's great open source platforms, but not everyone in every office of an institution is ready to spin up a server and configure some software. And in addition to running the program, like it might be one person running the program with a public program, much less the technical side. And in that case, I think a software as a service business model, which many of these companies do, a monthly fee, they do all the hosting, they do the security patches, right? I think that can be a great boon to a small public sector team that just doesn't have the resources. Whereas if you did have, some software developers on your team or some IT support, it might make more sense to do an open source one where you can totally customize exactly how you want it. So there's pros and cons, but I'm not against the private sector ones. And one other example from the US, this company Neighborland, which was eventually acquired by Nextdoor. But when you talk about, how do we reach diverse, groups online, which to be honest, the civic tech space has failed in many cases to do. And it can be challenging. Neighborland, from a very private sector perspective, they were like, we advertise and we use online ad tools to over-index on groups that don't normally show up to participate on these kinds of platforms. And they were able to reach, very large numbers of participation and very diverse and representative demographically of the communities they were in. So I think there can be benefits to the private sector. I think, but paying attention to accessibility, security, and also data treatment are important factors, of course. And then in terms of the majority rules question, in this last link I shared is the full guide, but I go into more detail there on sort of the different mechanisms, and they're kind of modules or features of these different platforms. Some are really common, like the upvoting where just majority wins. Others are more balanced and interesting, and that I spent more time on those because they're rare. The delib example I gave, they're based in the UK, they work in Commonwealth situations, but they had one tool that's just called like the simulator. And so it's very easy from the outside to be like, why is government cutting budget for the thing I like? The simulator was like, okay, citizen, here's the budget, here's some sliders, how would you prioritize the budget? And the simulator forced citizens to make trade-offs. You couldn't have everything. And just that simple act of empathy was powerful for me of, putting people in a real world situation instead of a dream car situation, you know? So I'm really interested in features like that and, you know, non-majority rule features where, you know, it begins to resemble the actual challenges that decision makers face. And then the more the public can be familiar with that and get to engage in that, maybe the more understanding we have. I don't know.
Absolutely. Okay, let's maybe take one last question from the room. Excellent, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question. In your guide, did you also talk about how much like tech investment or facilitation investment are required depending on this model? Because I think earlier we talked about sometimes how long it takes to get it right and what kind of collaboration it gets. So I think when we apply this, I think that would be something interesting for a lot of our colleagues applying those tools. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So in that same people powered guide, we talk about budgets for sure, because it's such a huge factor. And that's also why I often emphasize building the practice and just the methodology within your office or organization of doing this, of engaging the public in some way, that over time you can iterate and, you know, add tech to. But I think that's like that, and maybe you're already there, but that practice is the hard part, I think, more than paying a $50 or however much per month service. And some of the best, you know, vTaiwan, some of the best, most cited examples in this field use like Typeform and Google Docs and just cobble together different services. So it's not, you know, the bells and whistles are nice and you might need them in some cases, but they're not always necessary.
Excellent. Wonderful. Let's give Matt our thanks. It's really been a pleasure to have you here today. I hope you can stay on because we're moving right into another example of how we can use deliberative tech, harnessing the best and not the worst of AI. And we have Brittany here, the co-founder of the AI Objectives Institute, with her colleague. I knew how to pronounce your name. Is it Decher?
It's there, like
There, you see, anyway, I had learned that. There, I'm so glad that you're with us online and that Brittany's here. And again, AI Objectives Institute was founded to find ways that AI can be addressing different issues around inclusion, social harmony, cohesion, all kinds of things. And so there's a number of examples that they have already under their belt. And I'm excited to hear, Brittany, what you're going to share with us today.
Mute. I swear I hit mute. Okay. All right. All right. We are on. We are seeing the right thing. I am not seeing the right thing. So give me a second. Okay. It is muted. Okay. It was every time I swear it's muted. I'm going to blame Zoom because I classically love to blame Zoom for all of my presenting problems. So I'm Brittany. This is Talk to the City, a case study we did in Michigan. So what is Talk to the City? Talk to the City is an open source language model for improving collective deliberation and decision making. And what is important here is it analyzes detailed qualitative data. And then it aggregates those responses and arranges similar claims into topics and subtopics. And we started this work in May of last year around the discourse in AI safety and AI ethics. So many of you may not be familiar, but there is quite the fight between these two fields that continues to happen. And we thought, well, it would be really cool if we could visualize this discourse. And so we scraped Twitter and put a visualization together. And then we were thinking, what's next? I was coming off maternity leave and I was thinking, you know, great, what people think about AI is great, but like, what else could we do with this? And I kept going back to this exhibit at the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. So I don't know if anyone else has seen this exhibit, but it's very visceral. You go, you pick up a phone and you talk to someone who's incarcerated and you hear their story. And it like still brings like a emotional response to me every time I talk about it. And so obviously Talk to the City is not going to be some amazing activist art like the Equal Justice Initiative created. But it got me thinking, like, video is powerful. Talking to people or seeing people tell you their story is really impactful. And also, you know, we hear a lot about the bad of AI, and especially for underrepresented communities. But could we maybe use this to uplift an underrepresented community? And so around this time, like as serendipity works, we met Shawana Vaughn of Silent Cry. And Silent Cry is an organization that helps formerly incarcerated individuals and their families reintegrate back into society. And many of these people have been incarcerated for over 10 years. So there's a big change in society. When they come back, they need mental health services, obviously being in prison. And then returning to society is a very different and large culture shock for many of them. And so in talking to Shawana, she was really excited. And she's like, I have a lot of people who want to share their story and want to talk to you about this. So she introduced me, or before I get there, so our goal, right? So is creating really a collective source of truth for this community. Like, can we give Silent Cry something that they could use, that they could share, and that could have impact? Can we represent their priorities correctly? Another important factor, has everyone consented? Do they understand what consent means? And can we hear from people, in their own voice? And so Shawana introduced me to 12 people, most of which were formerly incarcerated, others were family members thereof. And I spent personally 10 hours interviewing all of them. So there's a few things. I mentioned consent before, making sure it's very easy for everyone to understand, oh, my name and video will be online, but it's like, yes, but a transcript of this is going to be fed into a language model that is owned by a private company for now. We were using GPT-4. Your name isn't, but like getting people who aren't necessarily familiar with what ChatGPT is at the time, familiar with that. So we spent quite a bit of effort making sure they understood. All of them were super excited to do it. And then for me as the interviewer, as someone without the lived experience, right? But making sure I was compassionate. I talked a lot to Shawana about, how do I approach this and how do I approach these interviews in a way that makes sure that, there's compassion. And I have a background in journalism too. So I'm covered things like Occupy Wall Street, and I'm used to interviewing lots of people from different backgrounds, but I just wanted to really be cognizant of this group. And so naturally, as you expect, there were issues. Turns out scraping Twitter is easy. Video transcripts that are long are hard. Who would have thought? So we came into some interesting problems. Like there was a lot of duplicate topics. So depending on the interview, some people would refer to themselves as formerly incarcerated, and other people would refer to themselves as a returning citizen. And so it would create categories that were like challenges for formerly incarcerated, and then challenges for returning citizen. And I'm like, these are the same thing. Like, but it didn't, understand that. And then on top of that challenge, we had, how do we present this information in a way that's clear, that's easy to understand, that anyone could look at and like figure out how to use. And then, this has come up before, but, the use of insensitive language. So very early version, in fact, the earliest used the term in a category of ex-convict. Now, anyone who's worked with justice-involved individuals knows that that is like not a good word. That is a very bad word. And this was not, the C word was not mentioned anywhere in the interview. The model came up with it themselves, right? And there's been recent papers showing that a lot of these models tend to have some inherent racism behind them. There's Google it, lots of papers if you want to deep dive into it. But again, we as an organization, we're still thinking like, yes, but like, could we still do something to uplift this community despite that? So let's see how, oh no, me and Zoom again. So now I'll show you a demo. I'm out of Zoom now, so I can't use that excuse. So this is the output of the report. So all of this is model generated. So a language model came up with this. There's about 500 claims total. The claims, again, are from the model based on quotes from the interview. And as you can see, reentry challenges is something that came up a lot. And if we click here, we can see there's 6 different subtopics within reentry challenges. And I'm going to highlight one from Technology Gap from Lionel, which returning citizens may feel alienated and overwhelmed by the technological changes that have occurred in society. And hopefully everyone on Zoom can hear this. Oh, wait, but you guys can't.
His blue. She said his blue.
Okay, which is the right way to do this? Okay.
I'm riding. I'm thinking.
Well, that's more. Okay. Oh.
I could hear it.
Thinking about this, man, they got devices where you ain't even got to touch the phone, and that stayed on my mind all the time. Then when I did.
So for those of you in here that didn't hear that. Lionel's describing a story where he returns, like he's getting picked up from being in prison for 20 plus years. And he drives by a bus stop with his mom, and there's this guy just like talking to himself. And he's like, this guy's crazy. What's going on? And his mom's like, he's on his Bluetooth. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, what is this? Because he had no concept that this existed. Now, different prisons work differently. There's different access to technology depending, but he had literally no idea, right? And you can imagine what if you actually just sit and think about it. If you went into prison in 1994 and you're coming out 20 years later, like you're in a whole new world. Job applications all online. What is this online thing? Like I didn't have this experience. So we're trying to show and illustrate that, you can hear Lionel like tell the story that's like kind of funny, but also like sad, right? At the same time, like it's this conflicting feeling. And it really, again, is like, we got to do something about this. And technology in particular seems like something that could be easily addressable. Another thing, that as the person doing the interviews, right, I had a sense of like, oh, this is what's going to be most important and this is not. And I was sort of right, but sort of wrong. I would have gunned technology as like the thing, but obviously employment barriers was something we spent more time talking about. So there's an interesting thing you can think about too of the journalistic bias that I had as the person doing the interview. So I also really cared about success stories because there were a few people who, all of them actually, who I talked to, like, despite everything, like, are doing amazing things. Most of them doing the work to help people who are now returning to society, working at organizations like on the ground, advocacy groups. And I really wanted to show some of those success stories. And, one of the individuals, he did after school programs. He wanted to be the person he needed when he was a kid. And so I think there's just hearing these stories are incredibly powerful. So I'm gonna include one more because mental health support, and we've heard that, in other parts of the conversation today, is another, I think, really, really heavy topic. So, oh, that's not the one. So let's hear from Angela. Okay, wait. Oh. And there's so many of them. I'm glad I was making eye contact with you. Sorry about that, everyone online. I was saying that Angela was talking about her experience with mental health and like returning back into society and how there was really just no support for her and there was no one to talk to. But she still had her mom. She had someone who was there for her, and how she works with so many people who have no one. There's a teenage lifer rule in Michigan that they're working on expunging, but teenagers get life in prison. And one example was a young man who murdered his mother's abuser when he was 13. And he came out of prison when he was 30 to nothing and nobody. And having left the world at 13, right? And it's like, how can you not, like, I'm gonna cry. I'm just retelling the story, right? Like, so I think, what we're hoping, to do here is to tell these people's stories and to give Shawana and people at Silent Cry an artifact that they can then go to lawmakers with and say, like, look, listen to this person. And like, you can visit this anytime. It exists. It continues to exist. So one other thing, so that's the demo portion. But one other thing that was really important that we did that I want to like highlight is the model came up with these 500 claims. I then walked through all 500 with every single participant to make sure that they were like, yes, this is right, or no, like, this is crazy. Most of the time it was, yes, this is right. The original error rate was about 5%. And those errors were like all over the gambit. Some were in the wrong category. Others were, I don't work at this organization anymore, so I don't want to be like affiliated with it publicly. Others were like, this is missing nuance, and others were, this is wrong. And so the ones that we ended up not that weren't fixable was about 3%, under 3%. So, I mean, that's pretty good. But it did take us a while to get here, so I don't want to like gloss over. We went through many, many iterations until I was like, I feel good enough. Like as the person, I feel like this accurately represents this community, and they all felt that way as well. And so there'll be a lot more detail on the nitty gritty, how the pipeline works for those who are curious. I will not spend more time on that. But I think the best thing I can do to leave it with is a quote from Shawana that Talk to the City's Heal Michigan report is where advocacy meets legislation to create change. And then this is a very long quote from Cozine, who was wonderful. I like want to be friends with Cozine, and who was one of the participants in the event. And if anyone knows who Lewis Hamilton is, he's like the American Lewis Hamilton. So I'm just like, be my friend. So anyway, I'm going to now turn it over to Dayer for the what's next portion.
Thank you, Brittany. So I would like to talk a little bit about where we want to go with what we have built so far. One of the things that has come across as quite critical for us to be able to scale the benefits that tools like Talk to the City can give is making it incredibly easy to use for everyone. So currently, with the current stack as it exists, Talk to the City can sit on top of a Google survey or on top of a Polis survey or over a range of different video URLs that you upload. Our goal is basically to be able to give the ability to be represented to every community, to be able to have them present a shared source of truth, an artifact, the URL basically that they all can point at. And also this to be not static, but continuously growing as new input is coming. I do see as the AI revolution is taking place and the communities that are most in need are actually falling behind on the transformation. So our goal is to make sure we can bring this to as many folks as possible. We are building an integration with WhatsApp, so it should be as easy as, like, our goal is for any community to be able to run collective intelligence with next to no effort. You don't need to have an engineer, you don't need a deployment. If you can run a Google survey, you can talk to the city. If you can make a WhatsApp thread, you can invite Talk to the City to the WhatsApp thread and it will run the same instance. So our goal is to make the elicitation process of new data sources as easy as possible and not reinvent the wheel. And if you have already a text data set that you would like to plug, it is basically would take about 15 minutes. The second piece on what's next is looking into different kinds of deliberative processes. There's decision-making oriented processes, and then there is creating shared collective sources of truth, which is actually quite relevant on peacemaking aspect. I would like to do a very quick screen share to show some different ways in which the same flow could work. For example, we are working with the VA, which is a veterans nurses union in San Francisco, and for them to figure out what are their top priorities for improving working conditions and be able to negotiate for this union, we run an instance of Talk to the City, open-ended questions rather than multiple choice questions, so that people can suggest, well, these are the critical issues for me, and to be able to go to the specifics of what people said. In this case, there is no video because all of this was done on a text survey. Another example was this sitting on top of a citizens' assembly in Taiwan. Going back to some of the examples Matt was pointing at, Taiwan has already started integrating this in some of their flows. Most of the data is in Chinese, but I just want to show quickly what are different aspects of AI policy that Taiwan should be prioritizing and adapting. So there was a common theme of, there should be a Taiwanese AI model that actually works with traditional rather than simplified Chinese was very critical, for example. So we can basically work across languages using language models to translate these. So our core goal is to be able to make sure this is easy to use for everyone and approaches different kinds of deliberation that is decision-oriented. One thing we found quite valuable is using multiple language models that can then correct each other to be able to refine, to be able to help with deduplication, or one language model to tell another, By the way, using ex-convict won't be preferred by this community because these people will not refer to themselves as such. And the last step is to make this fully open source. Currently, we can work on this with OpenAI's models or Claude from Anthropic, but we can also work with open source models. So our goal is for the models to be able to be community owned so that each of these communities have full ownership and stewardship over what they create. It is free to use. We're happy to help you set up an instance. And if you already have data, it would actually be very easy to try out what the AI representations would look like. So if you're interested, please reach out to us. Brittany will be around to chat. I wish I was able to show up in person as well. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Dare and Brittany. A quick round of applause before we move to questions here. You know, as we see, like the technologist with the interviewer and a focus on trying to enhance agency towards constructive deliberation, it's really it's enormous what you're building together. Let's see what kind of questions we have from the audience or anyone online. Okay. Yeah. Well, let me ask a question to Dare. You know, the idea that, I mean, we've got a lot of people who have needs for monitoring and measuring impact, looking at a few of you in the audience here. And the idea that you could sort of ask questions to lots of people, almost even in an automated way, and then use this tool to be able to learn, but still capture their verbatim, qualitative, distinctive voice, right? Is that another use case? Have you tried something like that?
Absolutely. A large scale survey on ground is, I think, one of the most, like straightforward directions to go. It doesn't really have to be around a specific already existing decision process. I'm seeing someone ask for my contact. I just messaged it there. Brittany also will be around for folks that are in person. But yeah, the goal is how can we enable an experiment with these different use cases and flows as well? Because we're a nonprofit and we don't charge different users. Our goal is to see as many different instances. For example, with Taiwan, the very first experiment we did actually built on top of a prior data collection that they already had. So they weren't collecting more data, but it was around informing the Uber and taxi policy. That is interesting, but it's actually a done, completed debate. And it took us about 10 minutes to wire that and show, okay, this is what the AI-driven representations look like. And on top of that, we now have a data set with 540K tokens, which is massive. It's one of the largest data sets they have gone through in their deliberative processes. So we can easily scale up past this point. And our goal is how can we have more humans to be able to use this so that they don't have to spend resources on collecting data through, more manual processes that would slower. Yeah.
Right. And let's take a question here in the room. Microphone anywhere?
Thank you very much. How are you communicating? I really liked how you talked about informing people about their consent and that process. That was a very interpersonal experience you had. How about people who are coming from, the outside world? They're interested in using Talk to the City. How do you communicate where their data is going, how it will be used, how it will be stored, data governance practices, all of that, whether you feel it's really relevant to this or not, how does that exchange go with the user?
Okay, I can take that. So I think it's really dependent on the situation. A lot of it is anonymous. Some of the stuff that comes through is actually just anonymous, so it doesn't matter as much. And everyone so far we've worked with, we have been kind of involved in some capacity with. So we have talked them through the process and explained that. As we're just kind of getting ready to launch it a little bit more broadly, we would have like a README or something that was very clear about how your data is used and where it's going. And if you are uploading anything to the internet with video, referencing video, like you're on the internet with your name attached to it if you so chose to, right? And this, this particular, use case was very specific for us to test like how well the model did. Oops. And it was a, is it me again? That's how I feel about you, Zoom. It looks like it was me. It did it itself. You all saw my hands. Yeah, it's just me and Zoom, man. There's a battle. And it's winning. So anyways, being really clear, and again, Dare had mentioned, right now we're using GPT-4. So OpenAI is getting your stuff, or Anthropic, either one. But if in this instance, none of their names were uploaded. It was just the transcripts. Like, so just being really clear, and as we expand this more broadly, like having a README that says like where your data is going and this is what's happening. And it's, that's kind of the best I think we can do. It's tough, like until we could have our own model that, Dare alluded to, but that's pretty tough. But again, like OpenAI doesn't know that, Clarence said this thing. It just knows like this was a massive transcript from someone probably in Michigan.
Right. I want to add an answer from a different direction with respect to expectation setting. So if we're working with a union, the union is already collecting this data. So there is, explicit communication on what they need. But also our tool is open source, which means anyone can just download it and run it without even talking to us, right? Which means it is really important to have them realize if you are using a model that is, for example, OpenAI's, then the data is in OpenAI's hands. I think it's super important for us to do this, be able to do this with open source models too. So you can say the data belongs to us, and this is not for the external world to be able to benefit from. Currently, this is possible with Talk to the City. You can also wire an open source model and do the cluster. So you can pick what model you would like to use. Currently, OpenAI's models perform best. So if people are okay with that, I recommend that. But I do think these will change also as people are developing more and more models. So
thank you. Thank you, Dare. We just have a question from Paul. If you can unmute, let's see if we can hear your question, Paul, online. Oh, no? Because I had tried to give him permission to unmute, but no. Okay. Okay, Paul, if you wanted to type in your comment, otherwise we're gonna move on. We're gonna move on to the next session. Yeah. So thank you again to AI Objectives Institute. And let's have our fourth and final panelist come up online. I'm so pleased to welcome Shira to the stage. Shira is a student at Harvard who took the initiative with, I'm sure, some accomplices to set up a hotline to offer multi-partial perspectives on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. And it wasn't through an LLM. It was through text messages. Yeah, that still counts as technology. So, so we're so happy to have you here, and please take it away.
Right. Okay. Yes, hello. Thank you everyone for still being here. I know it's the last presentation of the day, so I'll try to make it snappy. Thank you very much for inviting me. And yes, I'm the only person who's not going to talk about AI, I'm pretty sure. So hopefully that won't be too disappointing for this crowd. But yes, hello, I'm Shira. It's very nice to meet you. I'm a junior at Harvard. I study social studies and religion, and I have a background in mediation. I'm a mediator in Massachusetts small claims courts, actually. So not in Israel and Palestine, much smaller, but still kind of with the same skills, I think, that come from peace building and conflict resolution. I've worked in intercollegiate civil disagreement programs through the Ethics Center at Harvard, as well as serving on the Intellectual Vitality Committee, which works to improve viewpoint diversity on campus while still thinking about, DEI initiatives and respect and empathy and all of those important topics as well. And after October 7th, I found myself disappointed inside of Hillel, the Jewish Society on campus, that there seemed to be quite a lack of empathy for the situation of the Palestinians. And likewise, outside of Hill, I found myself disappointed at the lack of empathy for Israelis and the tragedy that occurred in Israel as well. And I sent an email to my dorm at the request of some of my friends, sharing one of the statements of our now former president, Claudine Gay, the one that formally condemned Hamas as a terrorist organization. And I sent the email as my friends requested, but I was a little bit worried that people might read it and, given, the challenging environment, say, oh my God, Shira hates Palestinians, which is not true. And so I said, I have a background in mediation and conflict resolution. Here are the things that I do. Here's my cell phone number. This is a really hard topic. It's really complex. I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. And I'm not going to judge you if you have questions, because, it's so hard to understand. So just text me if you want. If you don't, that's fine. And mostly I did that to protect my reputation, but got a bunch of text messages from a bunch of people very, very quickly. The first question was, what is the best solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I still don't have an answer to that one, but it was the first question, and it inspired me to create this hotline. It struck me that there really was a need for just information, and sharing as many perspectives as possible. And that's where the idea for the hotline for Israel-Palestine came from. So the essence of the hotline is that we provide as many, so we have 27 volunteers from all around the world, and they are trained in our own methodology, which is based on a very, very basic principle. The principle is, to be part of a conversation, you should know what other people are saying. Very, very simple. And yet so many people, see a graphic on Instagram on either side, or one side or a different side, and they say, well, now I'm an expert in the topic and I'm going to advocate for this, and anybody who disagrees with me is clearly morally corrupt. And I disagree with that. Hopefully many of us disagree with that. And so our premise is that when people ask us a question, we'll abstract the question. If they say, do you think there should be, we'll abstract it to should there be, for example, and we'll share as many perspectives to that answer as we can find. And we're very, very clear that we're not endorsing any perspective, and we're not morally equating any perspective either. We are just sharing the fact that these perspectives exist. We encourage people to engage with those perspectives. Because it's a texting hotline, we'll send them links for them to read articles, and we'll say, take a look. We're here to answer any follow-up questions and to have a conversation. That doesn't extend to an argument that we would have. It's not, you're not chatting with a friend, really. It's much more of an educational service than we should all connect across differences and get to know each other. That's beautiful and not what we do. And people can just kind of take the opportunity to learn. And ultimately, we're apathetic to what position they finally come to. We just hope that they come to it from a foundation of knowledge. So the problems that we're addressing a lack of holistic knowledge around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a lack of ability and opportunity for person-to-person intellectual conversations around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a lack of accessible and digestible resources. So you could obviously go to, Al Jazeera or the Jerusalem Post and find very, very strong opinions on both sides, but it's very hard to find one place that lists many perspectives in the same, accessible location. A lack of resources that share different, perspectives in one place. And then obviously, as we've been talking a lot about algorithms today, the echo chamber and perspective reinforcing algorithms that exist on social media. So if all of your friends are, posting stories about, calling Israel out for committing a genocide in Gaza, or, saying that Israel is absolutely not committing a genocide in Gaza, you're not really seeing a range. If you're on my personal Instagram, you're seeing quite a range, and it's a bit of whiplash every day. But that's not the norm. That's not how social media was obviously built, and that's something that we're trying to address. Okay. So we're addressing it in two ways. I talked a bit already. So that we have the texting hotline. So our volunteers come from different backgrounds, but they're all trained to give a range of perspectives. You're never going to hear that individual's personal perspective, just their ability to analyze and send the perspectives that are out there. Yeah, I already talked about this mostly. And then we have website resources. We had a newsletter going. We unfortunately don't have the staffing at the moment to keep it going. But all of our issues are archived on the website, and it takes the same approach. We pick a very, very narrow topic. We share as many perspectives as we can. So I think the one I'm most proud of is our issue on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. We, at the end of this, so we go through kind of historical understandings of both terms. And at the end, we have 6 articles that say that all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. And then we have 6 that say not all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. And we don't, say, and therefore you should think. We just, read them all and see what you think for yourself. So those are the 2 offerings of the hotline. You might notice there's this logo on the bottom, the Institute for Multipartisan Education. I'll talk about that later, but broadly speaking, that's the umbrella organization that I founded around the hotline that offers the hotline as well as a few other things. We'll get to that in a moment. I can't do a live demo so it is anonymous. The hotline is anonymous itself. We get people's phone numbers, but I don't even want to share somebody's phone number, not even knowing who they are. So instead, I've put this very difficult to read demo, which is only meant to show that on the user end, it's just a text message conversation. So you can see on the left, I don't know if it's the left for the Zoom folks, but in this room, it's on the left, like what looks like an iPhone screen. This is a conversation that I had with myself between my personal phone number and my access to the back end of the hotline. So you can see, you know, for me on the phone, it just looks like a conversation with anybody else. And on the back end, we use a software called Telsio. They do marketing and sales, but they also now host the hotline for Israel Palestine. And what's really great tech-wise is we have one phone number. Anybody can text that phone number. The questions come into an inbox that all of the volunteers can see, and then the volunteers can choose which questions they want to respond to. So if one feels too polarizing for them, or they feel like they don't know anything about that topic, that's great. They don't have to answer it. Somebody else can pick it up. It gets migrated to a private conversation. And if the volunteers who all are chatting over WhatsApp and like our group chats in WhatsApp get a question from the same person, it's assigned to them, but they don't know the answer, they can assign it to somebody else. So there's a lot of flexibility in the tech side for what the volunteers can respond to. Just to give this is a real life example. Somebody asked, I don't know if you can read it so well, did Hamas turn down a ceasefire deal with Israel this month? I don't remember what month this question is, but maybe it would be relevant every month since October. This person, our volunteer says, thank you for the question. It gives a bit of context. Israel and Hamas have been in negotiations for a ceasefire over the past few weeks. There have been ceasefires in the past. This is what Hamas alleged. This is what Israel alleges. Current negotiations are in a sticky place. Here's what Hamas is saying. Here's what Israel is saying. You can read these different articles. That's a very standard answer. This conversation ended here. Many conversations might have continued, but this is, I think, a great example of the way that our volunteers approach answering these questions. This is, if you go on our website, this is what the resource page looks like. Hopefully it will continue to grow, but for now, these are the topics that we've addressed. You can access them for free and just read through them if you're interested. Challenges. So there are a lot. So this organization, as you know, is now 5 months old. So you could imagine that there are quite a few challenges. It's also being led by a college student who has no entrepreneurial experience. So besides that broad overarching challenge, our biggest challenge, we were talking about marketing earlier this morning, marketing, big challenge, spreading the word about the service. So we had international press in the first 3 weeks. We were written about in 15 different newspapers, which was great, but 15 to 25-year-olds don't really read the newspaper. And so I think a lot of more middle-aged folks found out a lot about the hotline, which is great, but we don't really have a social media presence. I don't know that much about social media. I also can't do every single thing at the same time as much as I'd like to, and so I can't run our social media. So we're really trying to make connections with schools, universities, places of worship, and youth groups, both to get more volunteers and to let people know, you know, hey, social science teachers in the DC middle school area, when your students come to you with questions about Israel and Palestine and you have no idea how to answer them, that's fine. This resource is here for you. So that's definitely one of our biggest goals and biggest challenges is kind of getting the word out there. Recruiting more diverse volunteers. Obviously, this is a really difficult time for different people in different ways, and that lends itself to having more representation in some groups than others. And so a continual challenge is to recruit more diverse volunteers. But I'll talk in a minute about how that may actually not be quite a challenge that's not worth tackling, but not quite the challenge we should be tackling right now. Difficulty I mentioned, finding volunteers, because like as a volunteer organization, right, people can just fall off the face of the earth and that's fine. Like they have every right to do so, which makes it difficult for those of us who are still on the planet, trying to figure out where everybody is and what's happening. And then nonprofit infrastructure, right, like funding, setting things up, getting things running. What does it mean to have Google Workspace? What does it mean to, you know, have to file a 990? All of these things are things, you know, we're actively trying to figure out at the moment. But we're learning some really cool things along the way. First of all, over 300 people have asked questions to the hotline, which is a number I think to be proud of. And it shows that people are curious. I think in the college classroom, a lot of people will say, you know, I have a question, you know, I know this, and based on this, I understand this, and that helps me understand this. But the one small thing that I really don't understand is, and then they'll say a really, really big thing that they don't understand. In the hotline, people will say, because it's anonymous, I think, and because it's like an opportunity really just to ask questions, people will say, I've always wondered this. Can you tell me more? which is such a beautiful way, I think, of asking questions and, demonstrating curiosity and wonder about the world. It's something I wish we saw more often in person-to-person interactions, but it's really kind of reaffirmed that there is curiosity out there underneath all of the polarization and desire to demonstrate knowledge and understanding. The diversity of our volunteers, which does exist, demonstrates, I think, that education brings people together. We have volunteers who support the existence of the State of Israel and volunteers who don't. And they both work in the same organization, doing the exact same thing, which is sharing as much information as possible and helping people come to their own conclusions. I think that's a really powerful lesson for us to learn. And then this is what I was going to say about the challenge of recruiting diverse volunteers. Different people deal with grief differently and are in very different situations right now. And one thing that I've learned over the past few months is I went from really pushing hard to get, a great amount of representation from as many groups as I could find. And I'm kind of realizing that maybe that's not respectful right now. Maybe actually we need to take a minute and, let people be where they are and find the people who are ready and let the people who aren't ready, process the way that they need to, and that's completely fine. So those are three takeaways that I've got. Future applications, we'd love to do a WhatsApp integration because right now it only works for US numbers, which is unfortunate. The software they're great in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways they have very few integrations and, innovation possibilities in the tech world. So if anybody who does tech, who's currently in this room or on the Zoom, wants to talk to me about that, I'd be very happy to chat. We're also going to put in there is a way to do an integration where you get an instant reply saying, thanks very much for contacting us. We'll get back to you in 24 hours, which is our limit. Our concern with that is that people will then think that they're always talking with a chatbot. And I think one of the most beautiful things about the hotline is that you're always talking to a person. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to use AI to make it more productive and to help people understand what we're offering without making them afraid that they're actually talking to a bot and not a person. This model, I think, could apply to any polarizing issue ever. If you have enough people and kind of the infrastructure to start it, people could ask questions about, affirmative action, for example, and have people with different perspectives answering and sharing as many perspectives as possible. I think it's a model that could be applied in different circumstances. And then broadly speaking, so the organization that I run is called the Institute for Multipartisan Education. The Hotline for Israel-Palestine is a project of the Institute that came first, and then we built the organization around it. The Institute is not necessarily related to Israel and Palestine. We are a resource hub that supports schools in fostering curious and constructive disagreement across all subjects, both in and out of the classroom. So we'll partner with schools or with other organizations that are interested in improving this ability and fostering these skills. In particular, it focuses on skill building in whatever realm that may be. Right now, we're working with a school that in particular does want to talk about Israel and Palestine. That's great. If a school didn't want to talk about that, that would be equally great. But that's something that we're obviously continuing to grow. Is not as relevant necessarily to this expo, but kind of gives you the broader context of the organization. So that's the end of my presentation. I've designed these shirts. I think they're cool. I made them today on the way to this conference. It's a 7-day fundraiser. The proceeds come to us. So if you're interested, it also shares the number. So if you're walking around, people see it, they can text the number. This QR code, the second QR code, takes you to our broader organizational website. It will take you to the donate page, but you can navigate from there. Under projects, you can get to the hotline page. It's just hotlineforip.com. And if you're interested in volunteering or asking questions, you should text the hotline if you have questions. If you're interested in asking organizational or tech or nonprofit questions, you can email me at this address. And I'll be around after the conference, obviously, to chat. So thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna take another prerogative and ask another question first. First of all, so impressed by what you've accomplished as a college junior. I could barely tie my shoes when I was a junior in college. So really it's fantastic. I would love to hear like a bit more about your process on like how you choose the resources that you share, right? I think we as peace builders know like sometimes like not every perspective is safe to be shared, right? And sometimes it can seem like you're validating maybe dangerous perspectives, and I mean that's a whole debate we could have. But like how do you decide this is emblematic of this particular view? I would just love to hear a bit. And we had a question in the chat from somebody that asked that as well.
Yeah, this is probably the most frequent question that I get asked. Just to be clear, so what you mentioned, validating different perspectives. So we're very explicitly not validating or not validating any perspective. In reality, it seems like this is like the thing that would come up the most often. It's what we get asked the most. In reality, we actually get very few questions for which this might be a concern. A lot of the questions they're not simple questions, but they're not pushing that boundary necessarily of like, is this violent? Is this a conspiracy theory, et cetera? It's something that seems very obvious, but actually doesn't happen very often. So we very luckily don't have to spend a lot of time navigating that line. I would say that we do, we can't really draw a clear line and say, because if we were to draw that line, we would be saying these things are appropriate perspectives to have and these things aren't, and different people draw that line in very different places. So we will not say anything that supports violence, obviously, but we might share. So if somebody asks us, you can go on our website, you'll see FAQs. One of the questions is Hamas a terrorist organization? We would answer that question, for example, by saying this is the international legal definition of a terrorist organization. This is the Hamas Charter. The EU and the US has designated Hamas as a terrorist organization in their list of many terrorist organizations. There are some folks who view Hamas as a popular resistance movement, and this is what they say about that. You should note that that's the minority opinion, and we'll leave it there. So we will indicate, if something is minority, majority, and kind of what the general sway of things are. If something is very clearly a conspiracy theory, for example, that the Israeli soldiers dressed up as Hamas terrorists and infiltrated their own country and murdered their own citizens in order to create a pretext for attacking Gaza. That's an easier line to draw, but in large part, it's not something we actually spend a lot of time dealing with, which is great.
Yes, let's take 2 questions. Let's take 30 questions, and that's probably all we'll have time for. So let's pass the microphone around.
Oh, I'm lucky to have one over here at the window. Shira, as I mentioned, really, really huge fan of this resource. I think it's really wonderful. My question is, how have you gone about like vetting for the volunteers for the hotline? Is it based on interest? You have like an application process? Just curious to learn a little bit more about that. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I really admire what you are doing. Like, we try to organize an event at USC, but that got shut down by school admins. So yeah, but my question is like, this is asynchronous conversation, right? So what if this is a synchronous conversation? What do you think? Is that gonna make any difference? Is that gonna be as productive, as impactful as this is right now? Or do you think it doesn't really matter?
Hi, my name is Christine. I'm one of the Harvard Youth Fellows with NED, here for 3 months, residence fellowship. My question is regarding a statement that you made that really struck me. Fostering curious and constructive disagreement. How do you do that? Because that is the one thing that I have tried to do, especially with my project, and what I am here for is around countering disinformation for my fellowship. And I look forward to creating something, a work product that will foster the curious and constructive disagreements. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my other questions was asked, but is there any system in place to verify that volunteers aren't, I guess, not necessarily imposing, but pushing a certain personal perception or perspective?
Okay. I'm going to go a bit out of order. To the question of synchronous versus asynchronous, I want to make sure I fully understand what you mean. They could, if somebody texts and I have time, I'll respond right away. If I don't have time, I'll respond in a few hours. So I'm not sure if that would be considered synchronous or asynchronous. But does that answer your question? Like a conversation, like face to face. Yeah, so we considered that. There are the 2 reasons that we chose not to, among many others, is 1, people don't have time for their phones to be ringing in class. If my phone was ringing in class, I just wouldn't answer it. Whereas if the text comes in, I can answer it a little bit later. And also because we have such a focus on sending materials for people to read and come back to and analyze, I wouldn't want to like read them a link over the phone. That would be a bit awkward, I think. So texting is just more conducive in that way. How to vet volunteers. We have an application. It's on our website if anybody wants to apply. Basically, it asks 3 questions, and the third one is the most important. It says, this volunteer position will require you to put aside your personal beliefs and engage with perspectives that you might find really challenging or even abhorrent. How do you anticipate dealing with that challenge? And based on that question, we've said no to people right away. We've had conversations with people and said no after the conversation, and we've accepted people. But we have the kind of that first application and then a conversation, and then from there we'll decide if it's a good fit or not. And for some people say, thank you very much for reaching out. I think that you're actually more interested in doing something else, and that's fine. This is one mode of advocacy, and there are many others. How do we verify whether or not responses kind of fit with our model is kind of your question. So I and our deputy director and our hotline team lead have access to all of the conversations, so the volunteers can only see their own. We have access to all of them, and we go through a few times a week to see how things are going. If something strikes us as problematic, we can take it over and respond right away. If something is really going off the rails, that hasn't happened. We might reach out to a volunteer and say, thanks very much for answering this. In the future, it might be best if you did this. Or do you mind going back and adding something about this? So we have kind of that person-to-person oversight. And how do we foster curious and constructive disagreement? There's a lot of research that suggests that curiosity is really a depolarizing, personality trait. People who are more curious are more likely to entertain perspectives that they don't necessarily agree with. We're actually taking the summer, we being the Institute, to build a research team to really try and understand the intellectual underpinnings of this work, figuring out what the psychology research says, what are the best pedagogical methods for fostering dialogue and disagreement. So I don't have an answer for you right now as what is the best way to do it. If you'd like to join our team and look into it with us, we'd very much like to have you. But yeah, it's the preliminary research suggests that if there's a way to foster curiosity, which there's not actually a lot of research on whether or not that's possible. There's a lot of research that says if you are already curious, then you are more likely to. But if there's a way to, inspire awe or wonder or curiosity, that can serve as a depolarizer, and then lends itself to the skill building that I think is really necessary in having these difficult conversations. You can't really just say don't be offended, you'll be fine. You have to teach people, what does active listening look like? What does it look like to ask, intentional questions? How should your body language be when you're engaging with people that you disagree with? And building those skills, I think, is really crucial in even just beginning to have those difficult conversations. Yeah.
You want to go ahead?
Yeah. So if you can believe it, that's the end of today's event. So first of all, huge round of applause for Shara. Yeah. Thank you so much. What a fantastic way to close. I just want to say thank you to everybody who came, both physically in the room and online. This is the first time we have ever done this. This was the first time we've had a Digital Peacebuilding Expo. I have a gut feeling we probably will have some more in the future. But like I said at the beginning of this event, the community practice, we meet every single month. So if you're interested in joining the mailing list and seeing both updates on these monthly meetings, but of course we send out more information with resources and related events and publications and tools all the time. So come up to me, I can give you my card, send me a note. I do have a form as well, an interest form for the community of practice, which we will send in a follow-up note to everybody who registered for this event. And if you're not on the mailing list, you can use that to join. But I learned so much today. This has been fantastic. I mean, what a lineup of speakers we secured. So thank you. And as you'll note, we were recording today as well. So we are going to post the recordings online, but we'll confirm with all the speakers if that's okay. And we're happy to edit out certain segments and things like that. So don't worry about that. Yes. No, don't worry. We'll make you look as perfect as possible. Yeah. But thank you, everybody. We do have we have refreshments. We have wine and beer outside where the food was. So please help yourselves stay. We have the room reserved for another hour or so. So mingle, network. But thank you, and give yourselves a round of applause for coming today.
So I want to just again say thank you as well to you, Nick. Thanks to AFB. And yeah, please join us for voting. And thank you everybody online. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Online. Bye. See you next